The Aeldari Empire once dominated the galaxy with a reach and sophistication that humanity, even at the height of the Great Crusade, could never hope to match. For millions of years, the Aeldari civilization flourished across countless worlds, their mastery of psychic arts and technology creating a society where every whim could be satisfied, every desire fulfilled. Their webway stretched between the stars, connecting their domains in a vast network that made conventional space travel unnecessary. They had defeated the Necrontyr and their Khatan masters, forcing them into the Great Sleep, and stood unchallenged as the galaxy's preeminent power. But this very perfection contained the seeds of their destruction. The Aeldari psyche differs fundamentally from that of lesser species. Every emotion, every sensation burns with an intensity that humans can scarcely comprehend. Their long lives and advanced technology meant that basic survival required no effort. Automated systems and psychic constructs handled all menial labor. The Aeldari found themselves with endless time and the means to pursue any interest, any pleasure, any experience they could imagine. Initially, this freedom led to great works of art, philosophy, and psychic exploration. Yet as millennia passed, the pursuit of novelty became increasingly extreme. Pleasure cults began to form throughout Aeldari society, starting as exclusive gatherings where the wealthy and influential sought ever more intense experiences. These cults promised sensations beyond anything conventional society offered. What began as artistic movements and philosophical societies gradually transformed into something darker. The cults grew in number and ambition, their practices becoming increasingly hedonistic and cruel. They explored every possible sensation, pushing boundaries that should never have been crossed. Pain and pleasure became interchangeable currencies. The psychic resonance of these acts began to accumulate in the warp, feeding something that stirred in that realm's depths. The corruption spread like a disease through Aeldari civilization. Respected leaders and artists joined the cults, abandoning their previous pursuits for the promise of transcendent experiences. Entire worlds dedicated themselves to these practices. The Aeldari's psychic nature meant that their emotions and sensations echoed powerfully in the warp, and the collective depravity of trillions of souls began to coalesce into something terrible. Those few Aeldari who recognized the danger found their warnings dismissed or ignored. The majority of their race had become so consumed by their pursuits that they could not see the catastrophe they were creating. Some Aeldari, however, possessed the foresight to recognize the approaching doom. These individuals, who would become known as the Exodites, abandoned the core worlds of the Empire long before the final cataclysm. They departed for the Maiden Worlds, planets that the Aeldari had seeded with life, but left largely untouched, scattered throughout the galaxy far from the Empire's heart. The Exodites rejected the technology and psychic excess that had corrupted their civilization, choosing instead a simpler existence in harmony with these pristine worlds. They established agrarian societies, deliberately limiting their use of advanced technology and psychic powers. Their kin mocked them as primitives and fools, abandoning civilization for a life of toil. The Exodites endured this scorn, knowing that distance from the Empire's corruption offered their only hope of survival. The Craftworlds represented a different form of escape, though one that came far later. These massive spacecraft had originally served as trading vessels and exploration ships, vast constructions that could house millions of Aeldari. As the corruption deepened and the psychic disturbances in the warp grew more severe, certain Aeldari seers began experiencing visions of an apocalypse that would consume their entire civilization. These seers, whose warnings about the pleasure cults had been ignored, now spoke of a doom that would destroy everything the Aeldari had built. A small number of their people listened this time, recognizing that the seers' predictions about the corruption had proven accurate. The decision to abandon the Empire and flee aboard the Craftworlds came in the final days before the fall, when the psychic pressure building in the warp had become impossible to ignore even for those who had dismissed all previous warnings. Entire Craftworld populations prepared for departure in desperate haste, loading supplies and artifacts while the fabric of reality itself began to fray around the Empire's core worlds. Many Craftworlds departed with only partial crews, their holds half empty, as the final catastrophe struck before they could complete their preparations. Other Craftworlds never escaped at all, caught in the psychic maelstrom that engulfed the Empire. The birth of Slaanesh occurred in the transition between the 29th and 30th millennia, though the exact moment remains impossible to pinpoint given the warp's non-linear nature. The accumulated psychic resonance of the Aeldari's depravity had been growing for thousands of years, feeding the nascent entity that coalesced in the warp. When the critical mass was reached, Slaanesh burst into consciousness with a psychic scream that tore through both real space and the immaterium. The newborn Chaos God's first act was to feast upon the souls of the Aeldari who had created it. Trillions died in an instant. The psychic death scream was so powerful that it created a massive rift between real space and the warp, a permanent tear in reality that would become known as the Eye of Terror. This wound in the galaxy's fabric consumed the Aeldari Empire's core worlds, transforming entire systems into nightmare realms where the laws of physics held no meaning. The Eye of Terror stretched across vast regions of space that had once housed the densest concentrations of Aeldari civilization. Countless worlds simply ceased to exist in any meaningful sense, their populations consumed utterly by she who thirsts. The psychic shockwave from Slaanesh's birth rippled across the entire galaxy. On Terra, the Emperor of Mankind prepared to launch his great crusade. The warp storms that had isolated humanity's worlds for thousands of years suddenly calming in the aftermath of the catastrophe. For the Aeldari who survived, whether on distant craftworlds or exodite worlds, the birth of Slaanesh meant eternal damnation. Their psychic nature, once their greatest strength, had become a curse. Upon death, their souls would be drawn inexorably towards Slaanesh, consumed by the chaos god they had unwittingly created. The Aeldari had not been entirely unprepared for this fate, however. Even before the fall, some of their most talented psychic artificers had been developing technologies to protect Aeldari souls from the predations of warp entities. These efforts intensified as the danger became apparent to those few who recognized it. The Spirit Stone, or Waystone, represented the culmination of this work. These psychically attuned crystals could capture an Aeldari's soul at the moment of death, preventing it from being drawn into the warp and devoured by Slaanesh. The creation of Spirit Stones required immense psychic skill and access to specific psychoactive crystalline materials. Each stone had to be carefully attuned to its intended bearer, creating a sympathetic connection that would allow it to capture their soul at death. The process of creating these stones became one of the most crucial skills among the surviving Aeldari, as their entire species' hope for any existence beyond death depended on this technology. Without a Spirit Stone, an Aeldari faced the certainty of eternal torment within Slaanesh's realm. The Craftworlds had developed the Infinity Circuit as a repository for these captured souls. This vast psychic construct, woven throughout each Craftworld structure, served as a sanctuary where the souls of the dead could exist in a form of peaceful communion. The Infinity Circuit was not merely a storage system, but a living network where the dead could still interact with each other, and to a limited degree with the living. The souls within the circuit could provide guidance, power psychic systems, and maintain their Craftworld's functions. This technology ensured that death no longer meant the end for the Aeldari, though it bound them forever to their Craftworld, their souls unable to pass on to any natural afterlife. The Exodites developed their own variant of this technology, creating world spirits within the psychically active crystal deposits of their maiden worlds. These world spirits functioned similarly to the Infinity Circuits, though they were more deeply integrated with the natural ecosystems of their planets. The Exodite dead joined with the world spirit, their consciousness merging with the planet itself and the souls of their ancestors. This connection to their worlds gave the Exodites a different relationship with death than their Craftworld cousins, though both groups faced the same fundamental threat from Slaanesh. The survivors of the fall found themselves scattered across the galaxy, their once mighty empire reduced to isolated enclaves desperately clinging to existence. The Craftworlds drifted through the void, each one housing a fragment of Aeldari civilization that would never again know the unity and glory of their lost empire. The Craftworlds themselves represent the pinnacle of Aeldari psychic engineering, massive constructs that dwarf even the largest vessels of the Imperium's fleets. A typical Craftworld measures thousands of kilometers in length, though the exact dimensions vary considerably between individual vessels. Aleitok, known for its vast ranger populations, stretches across approximately 4,000 kilometers. Ulthwei, positioned perilously close to the Eye of Terror, measures slightly smaller but compensates with denser construction and more powerful defensive systems. Biel-Tan, before its catastrophic fracturing during the 13th Black Crusade, was among the largest, its aggressive expansion philosophy reflected in its extensive military facilities and weapon batteries. These worldships consist primarily of wraithbone, a psychoactive material that exists simultaneously in real space and the warp. The Aeldari do not construct wraithbone through conventional manufacturing processes. Instead, specialized psychers called bonesingers shape it directly from the warp itself through a process known as psychic singing. The bonesinger enters a trance state, their consciousness reaching into the immaterium to draw forth raw psychic energy that crystallizes into physical form according to their will. The process requires years of training to master, as the bonesinger must maintain perfect mental discipline while shaping matter at the molecular level. A single lapse in concentration can result in flawed structures that compromise the integrity of entire sections. The wraithbone matrix forms the skeleton of the Craftworld, a living network that responds to psychic stimuli and can, to a limited degree, repair itself when damaged. This material conducts psychic energy with perfect efficiency, allowing the infinity circuit to extend throughout the entire structure. The wraithbone's dual nature means that it remains partially anchored in the warp even while existing in real space, giving it properties that conventional matter cannot replicate. Weapons fire that would shatter ceramite or adamantium can be absorbed and redistributed through the wraithbone lattice, the material flowing like liquid to seal breaches before solidifying again. This property makes Craftworlds remarkably resilient despite their seemingly delicate appearance. The outer hull incorporates additional layers of more conventional materials, including psycho-reactive crystals and specially treated alloys, but wraithbone forms the fundamental structure. The hull's surface bristles with sensor arrays, weapon emplacements, and the projectors for the holofield systems that blur the Craftworld's appearance to enemy targeting systems. These holofields generate a psychic distortion field that makes precise targeting nearly impossible, causing enemy weapons to strike phantom images, while the actual Craftworld remains slightly displaced from where it appears to be. The effectiveness of holofields increases exponentially, with the number of psychers channeling power through the system, making Craftworlds with larger populations significantly harder to target accurately. The interior of a Craftworld divides into distinct regions, each serving specific functions for the population. The Dome of Crystal Seers occupies a position of central importance on most Craftworlds, though its exact location varies based on each vessel's unique architecture. This structure houses the Seers and Farseers who guide their Craftworld's destiny, providing them with facilities for meditation, divination, and communion with the Infinity Circuit. The dome typically sits atop a tall spire that rises above the surrounding structures, its crystalline walls allowing the seers to observe the stars while remaining protected from the void. The interior contains meditation chambers lined with psychoactive crystals that amplify the seers' abilities, allowing them to peer further into the skein of fate. Agricultural domes sustain the Craftworld's population, vast enclosed spaces where psychically enhanced plant life grows under artificial suns. These domes recreate the environments of the lost Aeldari worlds, with flowing streams, forests, and gardens that provide both sustenance and psychological comfort to a people who can never return to their ancestral homes. The plants grown here respond to psychic cultivation, their growth accelerated, and yields enhanced through the careful application of psychic energy by Aeldari who have dedicated themselves to this path. The agricultural systems produce far more efficiently than conventional farming could achieve, allowing Craftworlds to remain self-sufficient for millennia without requiring external resources. Residential spires house the Craftworld's population in structures that rise kilometers into the artificial sky of the vessel's interior spaces. These spires contain everything from individual dwellings to communal gathering spaces, libraries, and the shrines where Aeldari pursue their chosen paths. The architecture reflects the Aeldari aesthetic, with flowing curves and organic shapes that seem to grow naturally from the wraithbone rather than being imposed upon it. Each dwelling connects to the Infinity Circuit through nodes that allow residents to commune with their ancestors and access the collective knowledge stored within the network. The Aspect Warrior shrines occupy their own distinct sections, separated from the civilian areas both physically and spiritually. Each shrine dedicated to a specific aspect maintains its own architecture and atmosphere. The Shrine of the Dire Avengers emphasizes discipline and martial precision, its training halls arranged in geometric patterns that reflect the aspect's focus on balanced warfare. The Howling Banshee's shrine incorporates acoustically designed chambers where the warriors practice their war cries and develop the psychic scream that gives them their name. The Dark Reapers occupy fortified positions that overlook the Craftworld's weapon batteries, their shrine doubling as a command center for long-range fire support. Each shrine houses not only training facilities, but also the Exarchs who have become permanently trapped within their aspect. These warriors have walked their path so completely that they can no longer leave it, their personalities subsumed into the war mask they wear. The Exarchs serve as both teachers and living weapons, their experience spanning centuries or even millennia of constant warfare. They sleep in their armor within stasis chambers, awakening only when the Craftworld faces threats that require their expertise. The shrines maintain armories containing the specialized wargear each aspect requires, from the shuriken catapults of the Dire Avengers to the fusion guns carried by fire dragons. The core represents the most sacred and heavily protected region of any Craftworld, housing the Infinity Circuit itself. This chamber typically sits at the geometric center of the vessel, surrounded by multiple layers of wraithbone shielding and defensive systems. The Infinity Circuit appears as a vast crystalline matrix that pulses with inner light, each flicker representing the thoughts and dreams of the souls contained within. Millions or even billions of spirit stones rest within this matrix, each one holding an Aeldari soul that chose to join with the circuit upon death rather than face consumption by Slaanesh. The relationship between the living and the dead forms the foundation of Craftworld society. The souls within the Infinity Circuit remain conscious and aware, though their existence differs fundamentally from physical life. They can perceive events occurring throughout the Craftworld through the Wraithbone network, communicate with the living through psychic communion, and even power various systems by channeling their psychic energy. The dead serve as advisors, teachers, and guardians, their accumulated wisdom spanning the entire history of their Craftworld from the moment of its departure from the doomed empire. When critical decisions must be made, the living consult with the dead through specialized communion chambers. A Farseer seeking guidance might spend days in meditation, their consciousness merging partially with the circuit to access the memories and insights of specific ancestors. The dead can show them visions of past events, provide context for current situations based on historical precedents, and offer perspectives shaped by centuries of observation. This consultation does not represent simple ancestor worship, but rather a practical application of the Craftworld's collective experience. The dead also power many of the Craftworld's essential systems. The propulsion drives that move these massive vessels through real space draw their energy from both conventional power sources and the psychic potential of the souls within the Infinity Circuit. Navigation systems tap into the dead's ability to perceive the warp, using their insights to plot courses that avoid dangerous currents and predatory entities. Defensive systems benefit from the processing power of billions of souls working in concert, calculating firing solutions and coordinating responses to threats with a speed and precision that no purely mechanical system could match. The propulsion systems themselves combine conventional plasma drives with psychic enhancement. Massive engines positioned around the Craftworld's exterior generate thrust through controlled plasma reactions, but Bonesingers and souls from the Infinity Circuit shape and direct these energies with psychic power, increasing their efficiency far beyond what physics alone would allow. This hybrid approach allows Craftworlds to achieve velocities that seem impossible for vessels of their size, though they still move ponderously compared to smaller craft. For true interstellar travel, Craftworlds rely primarily on the webway rather than direct warp immersion. The ancient network of tunnels through the Immaterium that once connected the Aeldari Empire still exists, though many sections have collapsed or become corrupted since the fall. Craftworlds navigate these passages carefully, their seers constantly monitoring for signs of instability or demonic intrusion. The webway gates that allow access to this network typically manifest at specific points in real space, requiring Craftworlds to travel to these locations through conventional means before transitioning into the tunnels. When webway access proves impossible or impractical, Craftworlds can generate their own warp portals, though they undertake such journeys with extreme reluctance. The massive psychic presence of a Craftworld attracts attention from warp entities, and the vessel's size makes it a tempting target for demonic incursion. The seers must work in concert with the Infinity Circuit to create powerful wards that shield the Craftworld during warp transit, while warrior aspects stand ready to repel any entities that breach these defenses. These journeys rarely last long, as the strain of maintaining the protective barriers exhausts even the combined power of living and dead. Defensive capabilities extend far beyond the holofields that blur targeting. Weapon batteries line the hull, mounting everything from pulsar lances that can crack open enemy capital ships to banks of bright lances and star cannons for engaging smaller vessels. Launch bays house squadrons of fighters and bombers, their pilots drawn from the aspect shrines or from Aeldari who walk the path of the outcast as corsairs. These craft deploy in coordinated swarms, their movements directed by tactical coordinators who receive guidance from the Infinity Circuit's strategic analysis. The Craftworld Aeldari survived the fall, but survival alone could not guarantee their continued existence as a civilization. The same passionate, obsessive nature that had led their ancestors to birth Slaanesh through unchecked hedonism remained embedded in every Aeldari's psyche. Without the structure and discipline that their empire had lacked in its final millennia, the survivors faced the very real possibility of repeating the mistakes that had doomed their race. The Aeldari experience emotions with an intensity that would drive humans to madness. A simple appreciation of beauty can become an all-consuming obsession. Anger transforms into murderous rage. Love becomes possessive devotion that destroys both lover and beloved. The pleasure cults had not corrupted the Aeldari Empire from outside, but had emerged from within, a natural expression of their nature taken to its inevitable extreme. The path system emerged from this necessity as a psychological framework designed to channel the Aeldari's intense nature into structured, controlled pursuits. Rather than attempting to suppress their passionate temperament, which would prove impossible, the path provides a series of disciplines that allow the Aeldari to experience their full emotional range within carefully defined boundaries. An Aeldari following a path dedicates themselves completely to that single pursuit, excluding all others from their life until they have mastered it sufficiently to move on. This total focus paradoxically provides safety, as the structure of the path prevents the practitioner from sliding into the obsessive excess that characterized the fall. The philosophy underlying the path system recognizes that the Aeldari cannot change their fundamental nature. They will always feel more deeply, desire more intensely, and pursue their interests with greater passion than other species. The path does not attempt to make them less Aeldari, but rather provides channels through which this intensity can flow without leading to corruption. Each path has defined boundaries, established techniques, and most importantly, recognized endpoints where the practitioner should move on to a new pursuit. The system assumes that an Aeldari will become deeply absorbed in their chosen path, but it provides social structures and guidance from those who have walked the path before to help them recognize when it is time to step away. The transition between paths represents a crucial aspect of Aeldari life. An Aeldari might spend decades or even centuries mastering a particular discipline before feeling ready to move on. They must consciously choose to set aside their current pursuit and begin anew with a different path, deliberately fragmenting their identity to prevent any single aspect from dominating their personality. Over the course of a long life, an Aeldari might walk dozens of different paths, accumulating experiences and skills that create a multifaceted individual whose personality draws from many sources rather than being defined by a single obsession. The path of the warrior represents perhaps the most widely recognized of all paths, as it produces the aspect warriors who form the core of Craftworld military forces. Aeldari who choose this path do not simply learn to fight, but rather surrender themselves completely to the nature of war. They don the war mask, a psychic construct that allows them to embrace violence and aggression that would otherwise threaten their sanity. The war mask functions as a psychological partition, creating a separate identity that exists only during combat. When an aspect warrior removes their helmet after battle, they shed the war mask along with it, returning to their normal personality without carrying the psychological burden of the violence they have committed. Each aspect shrine teaches a different philosophy of warfare, representing a fragment of Kine, the Aeldari god of war who was shattered during the fall. The Dire Avengers follow the path of the warrior in its most balanced form, embodying disciplined aggression and tactical flexibility. Their shrine teaches the use of shuriken catapults and dire swords, emphasizing coordinated fire and maneuver. Dire Avengers serve as the backbone of Craftworld armies, their training producing warriors capable of engaging any threat with measured force. The exarchs of this shrine wear tall crested helms and armor decorated with complex knotwork patterns, their appearance reflecting the aspect's focus on nobility and martial honor. The Howling Banshees represent the aspect of swift, overwhelming assault. Their shrine trains exclusively female warriors, though the reasons for this tradition trace back to the first Phoenix Lord, who established the aspect rather than any inherent limitation. Banshees master acrobatic combat techniques and develop the psychic war scream that gives them their name. This scream manifests as a physical force that disorients enemies and disrupts their neural functions, leaving them vulnerable to the Banshees' power swords. The shrine's training halls incorporate obstacle courses and balance exercises that develop the supernatural agility for which Banshees are known. Their armor incorporates psycho-acoustic amplifiers in the helmet that channel and enhance their war scream, while their weapons include power swords and shuriken pistols designed for close-quarters combat. Fire dragons pursue the path of destruction through heat and flame. Their shrine teaches the use of fusion weapons, devastating short-range guns that generate temperatures rivaling stellar cores. Fire dragons specialize in destroying enemy armor and fortifications, their training focusing on close assault tactics that bring them within range of their fusion guns and melta bombs. The shrine's practice ranges incorporate mock bunkers and vehicle hulks that the warriors reduce to slag, developing both technical proficiency with their weapons and the psychological fortitude to advance into point-blank range of enemy fire. Fire Dragon Exarchs wear armor decorated with flame motifs, their helms shaped like draconic skulls with crests that glow with contained thermal energy. Striking Scorpions embody stealth and ambush, their shrine teaching infiltration techniques and close combat expertise. These warriors train in the use of chainswords and mandiblasters, helmet-mounted weapons that fire streams of monofilament wire or laser pulses at enemies who come within arm's reach. The Striking Scorpion Shrine emphasizes patience and timing, teaching its warriors to wait motionless for hours before striking with lethal precision. Their training includes survival exercises in hostile environments and practice in moving silently through terrain that would challenge even other Aeldari. The armor worn by Striking Scorpions incorporates chameleonic properties that help them blend with their surroundings, while their helms feature distinctive mandible-like protrusions that house their mandiblaster weapons. The Dark Reapers represent the grim necessity of dealing death from range. Their shrine trains warriors in the use of heavy weapons, particularly the Reaper launcher that fires missiles capable of saturating areas with explosive warheads. Dark Reapers embrace the inevitability of death, their philosophy accepting that war requires not glory or honor, but the efficient elimination of threats. The shrine's firing ranges extend for kilometers, with warriors practicing precision shooting at extreme distances, while their exarchs provide targeting data and tactical analysis. Dark Reaper armor incorporates sophisticated targeting systems and stabilization mechanisms that allow them to fire their heavy weapons with accuracy that lighter troops cannot match. Their helms feature skull-like faceplates and sensor arrays that give them an appearance of death incarnate. Swooping Hawks master three-dimensional combat, their shrine training warriors to fight while airborne using wings built into their armor. These warriors carry last blasters and grenade packs, raining fire from above while remaining mobile enough to avoid return fire. The shrine teaches aerial combat techniques and the use of the Swooping Hawk's distinctive grenade pack, which deploys various types of explosives, including haywire grenades for disabling vehicles and plasma grenades for anti-personnel work. Their training involves extensive practice in high-altitude drops and precision landings, developing the spatial awareness necessary to fight effectively while airborne. Swooping Hawk armor incorporates anti-gravitic wings and thrust generators, while their helms feature distinctive crests and targeting systems optimized for aerial combat. Shining spears continue the ancient Aeldari tradition of jetbike cavalry, their shrine teaching high-speed combat from mounted platforms. These warriors train in the use of laser lances, weapons that build up charge as the rider accelerates before releasing it in a devastating impact. The shrine's training grounds include vast open spaces where warriors practice formation riding and coordinated charges, developing the reflexes necessary to control a jetbike at combat speeds while engaging enemies. Shining Spear Exarchs ride jetbikes decorated with streamers and pennants, their armor incorporating additional protection, and their lances upgraded with more powerful generators. The shrine emphasizes the shock assault, teaching warriors to break enemy formations through speed and impact rather than sustained combat. Warp spiders represent one of the most dangerous aspects, their shrine teaching the use of warp jump generators that allow short-range teleportation. These warriors can materialize in the midst of enemy formations, unleash fire from their death spinners, and vanish again before the enemy can respond. The warp jump generators function by briefly shifting the wearer into the warp before returning them to real space at a different location, a process that carries inherent risks. Mistimed jumps can strand warriors in the immaterium or materialize them inside solid objects. The Warp Spider Shrine trains its warriors to make these calculations instinctively, developing the psychic sensitivity necessary to navigate warp jumps safely. Their armor incorporates the warp jump generator as an integral system, while their death spinners fire clouds of monofilament wire that shred infantry and light vehicles. Shadow Specters walk a path even more dangerous than the Warp Spiders, their shrine teaching techniques that border on forbidden knowledge. These warriors use prism rifles that fire focused beams of laser energy, weapons that can combine their fire into more powerful blasts when multiple Shadow Specters target the same enemy. The shrine's training emphasizes coordinated fire and the use of their jump packs for rapid repositioning. Shadow Spectre Exarchs wear armor that incorporates advanced holographic systems, making them difficult to target even compared to other aspect warriors. Their appearance on the battlefield often presages particularly desperate situations, as Craftworlds deploy them only when conventional forces prove insufficient. Other aspect shrines exist in smaller numbers or on specific Craftworlds. The Crimson Hunters fly fighter craft, their shrine teaching aerial combat in void and atmosphere. The Eagle pilots crew the larger bombers and transport craft. Some Craftworlds maintain shrines for aspects that have been lost elsewhere, preserving traditions that might otherwise vanish entirely. Each shrine operates independently, with its exarchs providing instruction and leadership, while maintaining the traditions passed down from their Phoenix Lord, the first and greatest exemplar of that aspect. The danger inherent in the path of the warrior manifests in the phenomenon of the exarch. Warriors who walk this path too long or too completely risk becoming unable to remove the war mask. They find that their civilian identity grows weaker with each battle, until finally it disappears entirely, leaving only the warrior persona. At this point, they don the exarch armor, ancient suits that contain the spirits of all previous exarchs who wore them. The armor dominates the wearer's personality, subsuming their individual identity into the collective consciousness of all who came before. The new exarch retains memories of their previous life, but these become distant and unimportant compared to the purpose of their aspect. Exarchs never truly leave the path of the warrior. They sleep in their armor within the shrine, awakening only when the Craftworld requires their expertise in battle. Some exarchs have existed for thousands of years, their armor containing the spirits of dozens or even hundreds of warriors who became lost on the path. This accumulated experience makes them devastating combatants and invaluable teachers, but it comes at the cost of everything that made them individuals. The other Aeldari regard exarchs with a mixture of respect and pity, honoring their sacrifice while recognizing the tragedy of their fate. The path of the seer leads to a different but equally permanent transformation. Aeldari who walk this path develop their psychic abilities, learning to perceive the skein of fate and manipulate the currents of the warp. The training begins with basic exercises in psychic perception and control, gradually advancing to more sophisticated techniques. Seers learn to read the future by observing the patterns in the skein, though they quickly discover that fate remains mutable, and their visions show only possibilities rather than certainties. The path teaches them to guide events subtly, nudging probabilities in favorable directions rather than attempting to force specific outcomes. Warlocks represent seers who have previously walked the path of the warrior, combining psychic ability with martial training. They serve as warrior mystics, using their powers to enhance their own combat abilities and support other warriors in battle. Warlocks can manipulate the perceptions of enemies, strengthen the resolve of allies, or unleash destructive psychic powers directly. Their training incorporates techniques from both paths, creating individuals who understand war both as physical conflict and as a contest of wills and fate. Warlocks often lead aspect warrior squads in battle, their psychic abilities complementing the warrior's martial prowess. Farseers have walked the path of the seer so far that they can never leave it. Unlike exarchs, Farseers retain their individual personalities, but their perception becomes permanently altered. They see the present and future simultaneously, their consciousness existing partially outside normal time. This state grants them unparalleled ability to predict events and guide their craft world, but it also isolates them from normal existence. Farseers gradually crystallize, their bodies slowly transforming into psychoactive crystal as they age. Eventually, they become entirely crystalline, frozen in the moment of their greatest vision, though their consciousness remains active within the infinity circuit. The crystallization process takes centuries, during which the Farseer continues to serve their people while knowing their eventual fate. The path of the artisan encompasses numerous specialized disciplines, from bone singers who shape wraithbone to craftsmen who create the intricate spirit stones. Artisans might specialize in creating weapons, armor, vehicles, or purely aesthetic works. The path teaches not just technical skill, but also the psychic sensitivity necessary to imbue creations with the subtle properties that distinguish Aeldari craftsmanship from mere manufacturing. A bone singer spends decades learning to hear the song of wraithbone, developing the ability to coax it into desired forms through psychic resonance. Weaponsmiths learn to forge blades that hold a psychic edge sharper than any physical whetstone could create. The path of the mariner trains those who crew the Craftworld's vessels and navigate the webway. These Aeldari learn piloting skills, astrogation, and the psychic techniques necessary to sense safe passages through the Immaterium's currents. The path includes extensive study of the webway's structure and the locations of stable portals, knowledge that proves crucial for maintaining contact between scattered Craftworld populations. Mariners also train in void combat, learning to coordinate their vessel's movements with the precision necessary for effective engagement against enemy fleets. The path of service encompasses those who maintain the Craftworld's infrastructure and provide for the daily needs of its population. These Aeldari might work in the agricultural domes, maintain environmental systems, or serve in administrative roles that coordinate the complex logistics of Craftworld society. The path teaches that service itself can be a form of meditation, with the practitioner finding meaning in supporting their community rather than in personal achievement. Those who walk this path develop deep understanding of the interconnected systems that keep a Craftworld functioning, their work often invisible to others but essential for survival. Numerous other paths exist, some common to all Craftworlds and others unique to specific vessels. The path of the poet, the path of the healer, the path of the teacher, each provides structure for Aeldari pursuing particular disciplines. Some Craftworlds maintain paths that others have abandoned, while new paths occasionally emerge as Aeldari develop novel approaches to channeling their intense nature. The system remains flexible enough to accommodate individual variation while maintaining the fundamental principle that structure and discipline prevent the obsessive excess that led to the fall. Yet not all Aeldari can accept the constraints of the path system. Some find the constant transitions between paths unbearable, or discover that no path satisfies their need for freedom and variety. These individuals choose to become outcasts, leaving their craftworld to wander the galaxy. Outcasts include rangers who scout ahead of their craftworld, corsairs who crew pirate vessels, and those who simply cannot conform to the rigid structure of craftworld society. The other Aeldari view outcasts with ambivalence, recognizing that they serve necessary functions while worrying that their rejection of the path system places them at risk of falling into the same patterns that doomed the Empire. The craftworlds that escape the fall each develop their own distinct culture and approach to survival, shaped by their location in the galaxy, the composition of their population, and the specific threats they faced. While all craftworlds share the fundamental structures of the path system and reliance on the Infinity Circuit, the emphasis they place on different aspects of Aeldari society varies dramatically. Some craftworlds maintain massive standing armies of aspect warriors, while others rely primarily on civilian militias supported by smaller numbers of professional soldiers. Some embrace isolation and secrecy, while others pursue aggressive campaigns to reclaim lost territories or prevent threats before they fully manifest. Understanding these major craftworlds requires examining not just their military capabilities, but the philosophical approaches that define their responses to a galaxy that has become increasingly hostile to Aeldari existence. Ulthwé occupies perhaps the most perilous position of any craftworld, drifting through the void at the very edge of the Eye of Terror. The massive warp rift created by Slaanesh's birth lies close enough that the craftworld's seers can perceive the roiling energies of the Immaterium without needing to enter a meditative trance. This proximity to the Eye brings constant danger, as demonic entities regularly attempt to breach the barriers between real space and the warp, while chaos fleets launching from demon worlds within the Eye frequently threaten the craftworld's security. The black and bone color scheme worn by Ulthwé's warriors reflects this grim reality, their armor bearing the colors of death and mourning for an empire that will never return. The constant threat from chaos has fundamentally shaped Ulthwé's military structure. Where other craftworlds maintain relatively small populations of aspect warriors who spend most of their time walking other paths, Ulthwé cannot afford such luxury. The craftworld maintains the largest concentration of seers and warlocks of any Aeldari vessel, their precognitive abilities essential for detecting threats before they manifest. These psychers guide Ulthwé's strategy, their visions revealing when and where the forces of chaos will strike next. The craftworld's response to this perpetual danger relies heavily on guardian militias rather than proportionally large numbers of aspect warriors. Guardians serve as citizen soldiers, Aeldari walking civilian paths, who train regularly in the use of shuriken catapults and other basic weapons, but do not dedicate themselves fully to the path of the warrior. The Black Guardians represent Ulthwé's unique approach to this militia system. These warriors wear black armor trimmed with bone white, distinguishing them from the guardians of other craftworlds, who typically wear the colors of their civilian paths. Black Guardians train more extensively than typical militia forces, their proximity to the Eye of Terror meaning they face combat far more frequently than Guardians from more secure craftworlds. They deploy in large formations, their massed shuriken fire compensating for their lack of the specialized training that aspect warriors receive. Heavy weapon platforms accompany Guardian squads, anti-gravitic mounts carrying bright lances, star cannons, or scatter lasers operated by Guardians who have received additional training in their use. Ulthwé's aspect warriors, while fewer in proportion to the overall population than other craftworlds maintain, still number in the thousands. The craftworld shrines focus particularly on the Dire Avengers and Dark Reapers, aspects whose balanced approach to warfare and long-range firepower complement the Guardian militia's massed formations. The Seers coordinate these forces with precision born from constant practice, their farsight allowing them to position troops exactly where they will be needed before the enemy even begins their assault. This precognitive deployment gives Ulthway's forces a decisive advantage, as they frequently ambush enemies who believe they are launching surprise attacks. The Craftworlds' leadership structure reflects its heavy reliance on psychic guidance. The Seer Council of Ulthway wields more direct authority than the councils of other Craftworlds, their visions determining not just military strategy, but also the Craftworld's course through the void and its interactions with other factions. Eldred Ulthrin served as Ulthway's most prominent farseer for millennia, his legendary abilities allowing him to perceive and manipulate the threads of fate with unmatched skill. His schemes spanned centuries and involved countless other species, all orchestrated to guide events toward outcomes favorable to the Aeldari. Even after his apparent death and subsequent resurrection during the 13th Black Crusade, Eldred's influence continues to shape Ulthway's destiny. The Craftworld's proximity to the Eye of Terror has made its warriors experts in fighting chaos forces. They understand demon physiology and the tactics employed by Chaos Space Marines better than any other Craftworld, this knowledge purchased through millennia of constant warfare. Ulthway's forces have participated in countless battles against the Black Legion and other traitor warbands, their interventions often occurring at critical moments that shift the balance of larger conflicts. The Craftworld Seers recognize that allowing chaos to gain too much strength threatens not just humanity, but the entire galaxy, making even temporary alliances with the Imperium strategically necessary, despite the Moan Keith's primitive brutality. Aeldari pursues a radically different approach to survival, one based on isolation, vigilance, and striking at threats before they can fully develop. The Craftworld maintains the strictest adherence to the path system of any major vessel, its society structured around rigid discipline and controlled progression through carefully defined stages. The blue and yellow armor worn by Aeldari's warriors reflects the Craftworld's stern philosophy, their appearance suggesting both the clarity of purpose and the warning of danger that defines their approach to the galaxy. This strict interpretation of the path system paradoxically creates the very problem it seeks to prevent, as many Aeldari find the constraints unbearable and choose to become outcasts rather than submit to Aeldari's demanding expectations. The Craftworld possesses the largest population of rangers and pathfinders in the galaxy. These scouts and snipers, drawn primarily from outcasts who maintain loose ties to their home despite leaving it. Rangers wander the galaxy gathering intelligence about emerging threats, their long rifles and camouflaging cloaks allowing them to observe from concealment and eliminate key targets without revealing their presence. Pathfinders take this specialization further, their enhanced equipment and training making them capable of infiltrating even heavily defended positions to gather critical intelligence or assassinate enemy leaders. These scouts provide Aeldari with an intelligence network that spans the galaxy, their reports allowing the Craftworld's commanders to identify threats long before they become immediate dangers. Aeldari's military strategy emphasizes preemptive strikes against potential threats, where other Craftworlds might wait until an enemy actually threatens their territory. Aeldari's forces attack based on predictions of what enemies might do in the future. Rangers identify Orc empires while they are still consolidating their gains, chaos cult activity before it attracts demonic attention, or Tyranid splinter fleets before they can rejoin the main Hive fleet. Strike forces deploy through the webway, hitting these targets with overwhelming force before withdrawing, leaving the enemy confused about who attacked them and why. This approach requires perfect intelligence and precise execution, both of which Aeldari's forces have refined through centuries of practice. The Craftworld's aspect warriors train extensively in coordinated operations with rangers and pathfinders, their tactics incorporating intelligence provided by scouts operating far ahead of the main force. Striking Scorpions work particularly closely with rangers, their infiltration skills complementing the scouts' intelligence gathering. Dire Avengers provide the backbone for Aeldari's strike forces, their balanced capabilities allowing them to adapt to whatever situations the Rangers' intelligence reveals. The Craftworld maintains smaller numbers of other aspects, focusing its resources on those that support its strategy of swift, precise strikes against carefully selected targets. The irony of Aeldari's situation does not escape its leadership. The very strictness that the Craftworld maintains to prevent its people from falling into obsessive excess drives many to reject the path system entirely. Aeldari produces more outcasts than any other Craftworld, these individuals unable or unwilling to accept the rigid constraints imposed on their lives. Yet many of these outcasts continue to serve their home Craftworld as rangers, their freedom from the path system paradoxically making them more effective scouts than those who remain bound by its restrictions. The Craftworld's leaders accept this arrangement despite its contradiction of their philosophy, recognizing that the intelligence network these outcasts provide proves essential for Aeldari's survival. Biel-Tan represents the most militant and aggressive of all major Craftworlds, its society dedicated to the dream of restoring the Aeldari Empire to its former glory. The Craftworld's green and white armor reflects the colors of life and death, symbolizing their commitment to nurturing Aeldari worlds while destroying those who would claim them. Biel-Tan's warriors believe in the prophecy of Ulthanash Shelwi, the rebirth, a predicted time when the Aeldari will reclaim their dominance over the galaxy. This belief drives them to pursue an aggressive campaign of expansion and conquest, attacking any non-Aeldari forces that occupy worlds the Craftworld considers rightfully theirs. The Craftworld maintains the largest standing army of aspect warriors in the galaxy, their shrines constantly filled with Aeldari walking the path of the warrior. Biel-Tan's military strength allows it to deploy multiple full-strength war hosts simultaneously, each capable of conquering entire star systems. The aspect shrines hold positions of unusual prominence in Biel-Tan's society, their exarchs wielding political influence that would be unthinkable on more balanced Craftworlds. This martial culture pervades every aspect of life aboard the vessel, with even Aeldari walking civilian paths expected to maintain combat readiness and participate in regular military exercises. Biel-Tan's strategic focus centers on maiden worlds, planets that the Aeldari seeded with life before the fall but never fully colonized. The Craftworld views these worlds as rightfully belonging to the Aeldari, regardless of whether other species have since settled them. When Biel-Tan discovers that humans, orcs, or other races have colonized a maiden world, they respond with immediate military action. War hosts deploy to eliminate the intruders, their attacks showing no mercy to those they consider squatters on Aeldari territory. The Craftworld coordinates closely with exodite populations on these worlds, providing military support to the agrarian Aeldari, who might otherwise lack the strength to resist invasions. The Craftworld's forces include massive formations of aspect warriors from every shrine. Dire Avengers march in companies hundreds strong, their disciplined fire devastating enemy formations. Howling Banshees deploy in swift assault waves, their war screams echoing across battlefields as they tear through enemy lines. Fire Dragons reduce fortifications to molten slag, while Dark Reapers rain death from elevated positions. This concentration of aspect warriors gives Biel-Tan overwhelming tactical flexibility, allowing their commanders to deploy specialized forces perfectly suited to any tactical situation. The Craftworld's Guardian militias serve primarily in defensive roles, protecting territory already secured by the aspect warriors rather than participating in offensive operations. The Swordwind represents Biel-Tan's distinctive approach to combined arms warfare. This tactical formation integrates aspect warriors, guardians, and vehicle support into a cohesive whole that strikes with the precision and lethality of a blade. The Swordwind deploys in multiple waves, each composed of different aspects chosen to complement each other's strengths. Fast-moving elements like shining spears and warp spiders hit the enemy's flanks, while Dire Avengers and Guardians engage frontally, and Dark Reapers provide supporting fire from range. This coordinated assault overwhelms enemies through sheer tactical sophistication, each element of the force supporting the others in a display of military coordination that few other species can match. The catastrophic damage Biel-Tan suffered during the 13th Black Crusade fundamentally altered the Craftworld situation without diminishing its aggressive philosophy. Demonic forces breached the Infinity Circuit, causing massive sections of the craftworld to fracture and separate. The vessel now exists as multiple fragments, each maintaining its own infinity circuit and population, but no longer unified into a single structure. Rather than accepting this as a crippling defeat, Biel-Tan's warriors have adapted, treating the fragments as individual war hosts that can operate independently while still pursuing their shared goal of Aeldari resurgence. The fracturing has, if anything, made Biel-Tan more dangerous, as the fragments can now strike at multiple targets simultaneously while remaining in psychic communion through their seers. Samehand takes an entirely different approach to craftworld existence, maintaining cultural traditions that predate the path system itself. The craftworld's red and white armor reflects the colors of speed and purity, their warriors favoring swift assault over careful planning. Samehand society organizes around kinship groups rather than the atomized individual focus that characterizes other craftworlds. These clans maintain strong family bonds and collective identities, their members supporting each other in ways that the path system's emphasis on individual journeys does not encourage. The craftworld's culture preserves warrior traditions from before the fall, when Aeldari society celebrated martial prowess and clan honor rather than attempting to suppress these impulses through rigid psychological discipline. The craftworld's military forces reflect this cultural emphasis on speed and clan structure. Samehand fields more jet bikes than any other craftworld, their warriors racing into battle mounted on anti-gravitic cycles that allow them to strike with devastating speed before withdrawing. Wild Rider clans form the core of Samehand's military strength, these warriors maintaining their own jet bikes and training together as coherent units bound by kinship rather than simply shared pursuit of a path. The clans compete with each other for glory and honor, their rivalries driving them to ever greater acts of martial prowess, while their loyalty to Samehand itself remains absolute. Samehand's relationship with the path system demonstrates that alternative approaches to managing the Aeldari's passionate nature can succeed. The craftworld's inhabitants do walk paths, but they interpret the system more flexibly than other craftworlds, allowing clan obligations and family relationships to coexist with individual pursuits. An Aeldari from Samehand might walk the path of the warrior as a wild rider, but they remain part of their clan throughout this journey, rather than separating themselves from all other identities. This integration of path and clan creates a different psychological framework, one that channels the Aeldari's intensity through both individual discipline and collective responsibility to their kinship group. The craftworld's forces deploy with shocking speed, their jet bike-mounted warriors capable of covering vast distances in minutes. Wild Rider clans strike at enemy flanks and rear areas, their scatter lasers and shuriken cannons tearing through light vehicles and infantry before the enemy can respond. Viper jet bikes provide heavier fire support, their weapon mounts carrying bright lances or star cannons that can threaten heavier targets. The craftworld's few aspect warriors typically come from the Shining Spear's shrine, their jet bike-mounted combat style fitting naturally with Samehand's cultural emphasis on speed and mobility. Guardian formations mounted on jet bikes provide additional firepower, their clan loyalties ensuring they fight with coordination that militia forces from other craftworlds cannot match. Samehand maintains close relationships with exodite worlds, their cultural similarities creating natural alliances. The craftworld's warriors regularly deploy to defend exodite populations from threats, viewing these agrarian Aeldari as kin who chose a different path to survival, but remain part of the greater Aeldari family. This relationship proves mutually beneficial, as exodites provide intelligence about threats in their regions of space, while Samehand's military strength offers protection that the exodites' limited forces cannot provide alone. The craftworld seers coordinate with exodite shamans, their different approaches to psychic practice complementing each other despite emerging from divergent cultural traditions. The craftworld's leadership structure reflects its clan-based society, with representatives from major kinship groups forming a council that makes decisions collectively rather than deferring to seers as other craftworlds do. The Seers of Same Hand certainly provide guidance and warnings about future threats, but the clan leaders retain ultimate authority over the Craftworld's direction. This distribution of power prevents any single faction from dominating Same-Hand society, while ensuring that decisions reflect the collective will of the population rather than the visions of a few psychers, however skilled those seers might be. The training required to become a seer represents one of the most dangerous paths an Aeldari can walk, as it demands direct interaction with the warp itself. Those who choose this path begin with basic exercises designed to awaken their latent psychic abilities, learning first to perceive the currents of psychic energy that flow through all things. The initial stages focus on developing mental discipline, as even the slightest lapse in concentration when touching the warp can prove catastrophic. Young seers practice meditation techniques passed down through generations, their instructors guiding them through increasingly complex exercises that strengthen their psychic defenses while expanding their perception of the Immaterium's depths. The progression from novice to warlock requires years of dedicated study and practice. Warlocks occupy a unique position among Aeldari psychers, having previously walked the path of the warrior before turning to the path of the seer. This combination creates individuals who understand both the physical reality of combat and the psychic dimensions that underlie all conflict. A warlock learns to channel their psychic power through their witchblade, a weapon that exists partially in both real space and the warp, capable of cutting through armor and flesh while simultaneously severing the target's connection to the material universe. The training emphasizes practical application of psychic abilities in battlefield conditions, teaching warlocks to enhance their own combat capabilities, protect nearby warriors from enemy fire through psychic barriers, or unleash destructive powers against concentrations of enemies. Warlocks typically accompany guardian militias into battle, their presence providing both tactical flexibility and spiritual reassurance. They can perceive threats that normal warriors cannot detect, sensing ambushes before they spring or identifying enemy psychers attempting to work their own powers. The warlock's combat training allows them to fight alongside the guardians they support rather than remaining behind the lines, their witchblades and shuriken pistols supplementing their psychic abilities. Many warlocks wear armor that combines elements of their previous aspect with the robes and psychic amplifiers required for their current path, creating a distinctive appearance that marks them as warrior mystics rather than pure combatants or contemplative seers. The transition from warlock to farseer marks a point of no return, though the individual may not recognize it immediately. Farseers develop their abilities to perceive the skein of fate, learning to trace the countless threads of possibility that extend from every decision and action. This perception does not reveal a single predetermined future, but rather shows the branching paths that reality might follow depending on which choices are made. A farseer examining a military campaign might perceive thousands of possible outcomes, each one dependent on factors ranging from the positioning of individual warriors to the weather conditions on distant worlds. The skill lies not in seeing these possibilities, but in identifying which threads lead toward favorable outcomes and determining how to guide events along those paths. The runes of the Aeldari serve as tools for focusing and interpreting these visions. Each rune represents a concept, an archetype, or a force that shapes events in the material universe. The rune of the warrior signifies conflict and martial prowess. The rune of the traveler indicates journeys and transitions between states. The rune of endings marks conclusions and transformations. Farseers cast these runes in complex patterns, their psychically attuned minds interpreting the relationships between different symbols to understand the forces acting upon specific situations. A farseer seeking guidance about an impending battle might cast runes to determine which forces will prove most significant in determining the outcome, whether enemy morale, terrain advantages, or the intervention of unexpected allies will matter most. The practice of rune casting requires intense concentration and psychic sensitivity. The farseer enters a meditative trance, their consciousness expanding to touch the skein of fate while their hands arrange the runes according to patterns that emerge from their visions. The process resembles a conversation between the farseer's conscious mind and the deeper currents of fate itself, with the runes serving as a language through which both can communicate. Different farseers develop their own casting techniques based on their training and personal inclinations. Some use elaborate spreads involving dozens of runes arranged in geometric patterns, while others prefer simpler casts that focus on a few key symbols. The interpretation matters more than the specific method, as the runes themselves possess no inherent power beyond serving as focal points for the farseer's perception. The dangers of peering too deeply into the warp grow more severe as a seer's abilities develop. Every time a farseer extends their consciousness into the immaterium to examine the skein of fate, they expose themselves to the predatory entities that inhabit that realm. Demons constantly search for any consciousness that ventures into their domain, seeking to corrupt or consume it. The farseer must maintain perfect mental discipline, their psychic defenses remaining impenetrable even as they open their perception to visions that would drive lesser beings mad. A single moment of weakness, a brief lapse in concentration, can allow demonic influence to seep into the farseer's mind. The corruption might manifest immediately as possession, or it might remain dormant for years, slowly warping the farseer's judgment until their visions lead their craftworld toward disaster rather than salvation. The risk of petrification represents an even more insidious danger than demonic corruption. Farseers who walk their path too long gradually transform into psychoactive crystal, their physical bodies slowly converting into the same material from which spirit stones are crafted. The process begins subtly, with small patches of crystallization appearing on the farseer's skin. These patches spread slowly over decades or centuries, the rate varying based on how frequently and deeply the farseer peers into the warp. The crystallization does not cause pain or impair the farseer's abilities initially. Many farseers continue serving their craftworlds for centuries after the process begins, their growing crystalline structure actually enhancing their psychic capabilities by providing a more stable anchor for their consciousness during deep trances. Eventually, however, the crystallization reaches a critical point where the farseer's body becomes entirely transformed. At this stage, they can no longer move or speak, their physical form frozen in whatever position they occupied during their final vision. Their consciousness remains active, still capable of perceiving the skein of fate and communicating through psychic communion with other seers. The craftworld typically places these crystallized farseers in positions of honor within the dome of crystal seers, where they continue to provide guidance despite their immobile state. Some crystallized farseers eventually choose to merge their consciousness with the infinity circuit, joining the collective of souls within that vast network. Others maintain their individual awareness for millennia, serving as eternal guardians and advisors whose perspective spans ages. The discipline required to avoid madness while walking the path of the seer exceeds what any other path demands. A farseer must learn to perceive horrors that would shatter normal minds without allowing those visions to affect their judgment or emotional stability. They witness possible futures where their craftworld burns, where their people are consumed by demons, where everything they love is destroyed. These visions feel completely real while they last, indistinguishable from actual experience. The farseer must maintain enough detachment to recognize them as mere possibilities rather than certainties, while remaining emotionally invested enough to care about preventing the worst outcomes. This balance requires a form of psychological compartmentalization that few Aeldari can achieve, separating their emotional responses from their analytical assessment of what they perceive. The webway network that the craftworlds use for travel represents one of the few surviving legacies of the Old Ones, the ancient species that created the Aeldari themselves millions of years ago. The Old Ones constructed the webway during their war against the Necrontyr and their Khatan masters, creating a network of tunnels through the warp that allowed safe travel between distant points in the galaxy. These passages exist in a space between real space and the immaterium, isolated from both by barriers of unknown composition that prevent demonic entities from entering while still allowing physical matter to pass through. The network once connected every major Aeldari world, with countless gates providing access from real space into the tunnels and back out again at destinations that might lie thousands of light years away. The labyrinthine structure of the webway defies conventional spatial logic. Passages branch and reconnect in patterns that make no sense according to three-dimensional geometry. A tunnel might stretch for what seems like kilometers, while actually connecting 2 points only meters apart in real space. Other passages compress vast distances into short walks, allowing travelers to cross from one side of the galaxy to the other in days rather than the years such a journey would require through normal space or even warp travel. The webway's structure remains stable despite existing partially within the warp, the old one's construction techniques creating barriers that have endured for millions of years despite the immaterium's chaotic nature. The fall damaged the webway extensively, though the network's fundamental structure survived. The psychic catastrophe that birthed Slaanesh created shock waves that collapsed many passages and weakened the barriers protecting others. Entire sections of the network became inaccessible, their gates sealed or destroyed. Other passages suffered partial breaches where the barriers thinned enough to allow warp energy to seep through, making them dangerous to traverse without powerful psychic protection. The Craftworlds maintain charts of known safe routes, but these maps remain incomplete. Explorers occasionally discover previously unknown passages or find that routes marked as safe have deteriorated to the point of being unusable. Craftworlds navigate the webway using a combination of ancient charts and psychic perception. Seers aboard the vessel constantly monitor the passages ahead, sensing any instabilities or threats before the Craftworld reaches them. The process requires coordination between multiple Farseers working in concert, their combined perception allowing them to perceive the webway's structure with greater clarity than any individual could achieve. When the Seers detect danger ahead, the Craftworld's navigators plot alternate routes, sometimes requiring detours through dozens of intermediate passages to reach their intended destination. This navigation remains far safer than traveling through the warp directly, but it still carries risks that conventional real space travel does not. The Craftworlds use the webway not just for their own travel, but as a strategic asset for warfare. Strike forces can deploy through webway gates directly onto target worlds, bypassing any orbital defenses or naval forces that might prevent conventional invasions. The Aeldari emerge from the gate already in position to strike at critical targets, their arrival giving enemies no time to prepare effective responses. After completing their objectives, the strike force withdraws back through the gate, disappearing before enemy reinforcements can arrive. This hit-and-run approach allows relatively small Aeldari forces to achieve effects far beyond what their numbers would suggest, as they can concentrate overwhelming force at decisive points while avoiding prolonged engagements that would favor enemies with superior numbers. The threat of chaos incursions into the webway has grown dramatically worse since the fall of Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift. The massive warp storm that now bisects the galaxy has created unprecedented instability throughout the immaterium, and this turbulence affects the webway despite its protected nature. Passages that remain stable for millennia have begun showing signs of deterioration, their barriers thinning as the increased warp activity erodes the old one's ancient construction. Demonic entities probe these weakened sections constantly, searching for any breach through which they can enter the network. Several major passages have been lost entirely to chaos corruption, their interiors transformed into demon-infested hellscapes that no sane being would attempt to traverse. The Craftworlds have responded by establishing permanent guardian forces at critical webway junctions, positioning troops to defend against any demonic incursion. These garrisons remain on constant alert, their warriors knowing that a breach could occur at any moment. Aspect warriors from the Dark Reapers and Dire Avengers shrines typically staff these positions, their training in sustained defensive combat making them well suited for holding choke points against demonic assault. Warlocks accompany these forces, their psychic abilities essential for detecting approaching threats and reinforcing the barriers that protect the passages. Some particularly critical junctions host entire war hosts, with thousands of warriors maintaining eternal vigilance against the forces of chaos. The presence of Kimura within the webway complicates the Craftworld's use of the network. The dark city of the Drukhari occupies a massive pocket dimension accessible through countless gates scattered throughout the webway. The Drukhari control vast sections of the network, their knowledge of its passages exceeding even what the Craftworlds retain. The relationship between the Craftworld Aeldari and their dark kin remains complex and often hostile. The Drukhari raid real space civilizations for slaves and victims to sustain themselves through torture and suffering, practices that the Craftworld Aeldari find abhorrent despite understanding the desperation that drives them. Both groups avoid each other when possible, but conflicts occur when their interests collide or when the Drukhari decide to raid Craftworld territories. The Drukhari's presence means that the Craftworlds cannot assume any webway passage remains secure. Drukhari raiding parties might emerge from hidden gates at any time, striking at Craftworld forces before vanishing back into the network. The Darkkin also sometimes deliberately sabotage passages or collapse gates to deny them to their Craftworld cousins, particularly when such actions might drive the Craftworlds toward conflicts that serve Drukhari interests. Some Archons of Camorra maintain trading relationships with specific Craftworlds, exchanging information about webway passages or providing mercenary support in return for payment in spirit stones or other resources. These arrangements remain fragile and temporary, both sides understanding that cooperation lasts only as long as mutual benefit continues. The ongoing battle to maintain and defend the webway consumes significant resources from every Craftworld. Bonesingers work constantly to repair damaged passages and reinforce weakened barriers, their psychic songs attempting to restore what the Old Ones created millions of years ago. The work proceeds slowly, as the Bonesingers lack the complete understanding of the Old Ones' techniques. They can patch breaches and shore up failing structures, but true restoration remains beyond their capabilities. Each repair represents a temporary solution that will eventually require additional maintenance as the webway continues its gradual deterioration. The Craftworlds recognize that they fight a losing battle, that eventually the network will degrade beyond their ability to maintain it, but they persist because the webway remains essential for their survival in a hostile galaxy. The shrine system forms the foundation of Craftworld military organization, each shrine dedicated to a specific aspect of Kine, representing a particular philosophy of warfare. These shrines function as both temples and training facilities, their architecture designed to immerse warriors in the mindset required for their chosen aspect. The Striking Scorpion Shrine incorporates shadowed corridors and concealed chambers that force warriors to navigate by instinct and heightened awareness. The Howling Banshees train in halls where psycho-acoustic resonators amplify sound, teaching them to weaponize their voices while learning to fight amid deafening noise. Each shrine maintains its own distinct culture and traditions, passed down from the Phoenix Lord who first established that aspect during the chaos following the fall. The Exarchs who lead these shrines represent the most tragic figures in Craftworld society. These warriors walked the path of the warrior so completely that they could never leave it, their civilian identities consumed by the war mask until nothing remained but the warrior persona. When an Aeldari reaches this point, they don the Exarch armor, ancient suits that contain the spirits of all previous Exarchs who wore them. The armor functions as a psychic repository, each suit housing dozens or even hundreds of souls accumulated over millennia. These spirits merge with the new wearer's consciousness, their combined memories and skills creating an entity that transcends any individual warrior. The process of becoming an Exarch transforms the wearer irreversibly. Their personality fragments and disperses as the armor's previous occupants assert their presence, contributing their own memories and combat experience to the collective consciousness. The new Exarch retains some awareness of their previous life, but these memories become distant and unimportant compared to the singular purpose of perfecting their aspect's killing art. They experience existence as a continuous flow of combat and training, their perception of time becoming non-linear as memories from previous wearers blend with their own experiences. An Exarch might recall battles fought thousands of years before their birth as vividly as engagements they personally participated in, the armor's psychic matrix making no distinction between past and present occupants. Exarchs never truly rest. Between battles, they enter a form of suspended animation within their armor, their consciousness retreating into a meditative state where they commune with the previous spirits and refine their understanding of warfare. The shrines contain specialized chambers where exarchs stand motionless for years or even decades, their armor sustaining their physical form while their minds explore the accumulated tactical knowledge of all who came before. When the craftworld faces threats requiring their expertise, the exarchs awaken instantly, their transition from dormancy to combat readiness taking only seconds. This eternal vigil means that exarchs accumulate combat experience spanning millennia, their skills honed through countless battles across the galaxy. The exarchs serve as instructors for Aeldari, newly embarking on the path of the warrior. They teach not through conventional pedagogy, but through demonstration and psychic communion, allowing students to experience echoes of the battles the exarch has fought. A novice Dire Avenger might train with an exarch who has defended their craftworld for 3,000 years, the ancient warrior's movements demonstrating techniques perfected through uncountable engagements. The exarch corrects errors with minimal words, their teaching style emphasizing repetition and muscle memory over intellectual understanding. They know that true mastery of their aspect requires the warrior to internalize the techniques until they become instinctive, the body responding to threats before the conscious mind registers them. Each aspect shrine maintains its own hierarchy and traditions, but all share the fundamental structure of exarchs leading squads of warriors who have not yet become trapped on the path. A typical Dire Avenger shrine might house 3 or 4 exarchs and train several hundred warriors at various stages of progression. The most experienced warriors lead squads in battle under the exarch's supervision, learning command skills while continuing to refine their own combat abilities. These squad leaders might eventually become exarchs themselves if they walk the path too long, though most recognize the warning signs and transition to other paths before reaching that point of no return. The organization of a craftworld warhost combines these professional aspect warriors with guardian militias drawn from the civilian population. Guardians represent Aeldari walking other paths, who maintain basic combat training and respond when the craftworld faces threats requiring more troops than the aspect shrines alone can provide. Every craftworld citizen learns to use a shuriken catapult and receives instruction in basic squad tactics. This training considered essential preparation for the dangers of a hostile galaxy. Guardians wear armor in colors reflecting their civilian paths rather than the uniform appearance of aspect warriors, their equipment maintained in community armories scattered throughout the craftworld's residential districts. Guardian squads typically consist of 10 to 20 warriors led by a more experienced Aeldari who has previously walked the path of the warrior or possesses natural leadership abilities. These units lack the specialized training and equipment of aspect warriors, but they compensate through numbers and the psychic coordination that comes naturally to Aeldari fighting together. Guardian squads deploy with heavy weapon platforms, anti-gravitic mounts carrying weapons too large for individual warriors to carry. These platforms hover alongside the squad, their weapons operated by guardians who have received additional training in their use. A platform might mount a bright lance for engaging enemy armor, a star cannon for versatile fire support, or a scatter laser for suppressing enemy infantry. Storm Guardians represent a more aggressive variant, equipped for close quarters combat rather than ranged engagement. These warriors carry power swords or chainswords paired with shuriken pistols, their role involving assaults on enemy positions or clearing structures where ranged weapons prove less effective. Storm Guardians receive more intensive training than standard Guardian militia, their tactics incorporating elements borrowed from aspect warrior techniques without requiring the total commitment to the path of the warrior. Some Storm Guardian squads include specialists carrying flamers or fusion guns, providing the squad with options for dealing with fortified positions or armored threats at close range. The coordination of these diverse elements falls to the autarchs, Aeldari who have walked many different paths and accumulated broad experience across multiple disciplines. An autarch typically has experience as an aspect warrior, often from multiple shrines, combined with training as a pilot, vehicle crew, or other military specialization. This varied background gives them understanding of how different military assets function and how to combine them effectively. Autarchs study strategy and tactics extensively, learning to read battlefields and anticipate enemy movements through both conventional military analysis and limited precognitive ability developed through their exposure to multiple paths. The Autarch's role extends beyond simple battlefield command. They serve as the interface between the Farseers who perceive threats through divination and the warriors who must respond to those threats through physical action. A Farseer might determine that an Orc warboss must die before their horde can consolidate, but the Farseer lacks the tactical expertise to plan the actual assassination. The Autarch receives this strategic guidance and translates it into operational plans, determining which forces to deploy, where they should strike, and how to extract them after completing the mission. This collaboration between prophetic vision and tactical execution allows Craftworld forces to achieve effects that seem impossible to enemies who lack such coordination. Farseers provide strategic direction by examining the skein of fate and identifying which actions will produce favorable outcomes. They perceive the branching possibilities extending from different choices, seeing how deploying striking scorpions instead of howling banshees might affect the battle's outcome, or how attacking at dawn rather than dusk could mean the difference between victory and catastrophic defeat. The Farseers communicate these insights to the Autarchs through a combination of direct psychic communion and more conventional briefings, their guidance shaping the overall strategy while leaving tactical implementation to commanders with battlefield experience. The war host that actually deploys to engage threats typically combines elements from multiple shrines with guardian support and specialized assets. A typical strike force might include several squads of Dire Avengers providing flexible fire support, a unit of Howling Banshees for assault operations, Dark Reapers for long-range fire, and Guardian squads to hold objectives or provide additional firepower. The exact composition varies based on the mission requirements and the Farseer's divinations about what forces will prove most effective. Some engagements require overwhelming assault capability, leading to war hosts heavy with banshees, scorpions, and fire dragons. Others demand precision firepower, resulting in forces built around Dark Reapers and Dire Avengers supported by heavy weapon platforms. Support elements add capabilities that infantry alone cannot provide. Wraithlords tower over other warriors, these massive constructs piloted by the spirits of dead Aeldari who volunteered to continue serving their craftworld in this form. A Wraithlord stands roughly twice the height of a human, its wraithbone body housing sophisticated weapon systems and the spirit stone of its pilot. The dead warrior's consciousness interfaces directly with the construct systems, perceiving through its sensors and controlling its movements through thought alone. Wraithlords carry weapons ranging from flamers and shuriken cannons to bright lances and missile launchers, their firepower equivalent to light vehicles while maintaining the mobility of infantry. The experience of piloting a Wraithlord differs fundamentally from physical existence. The spirit perceives the world through sensors that detect spectrums invisible to living eyes, seeing heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, and psychic emanations simultaneously. Physical sensations translate into data streams, the Wraithlord systems converting impacts and damage into information the spirit can process. This disconnection from physical existence can be disorienting initially, but experienced Wraithlord pilots adapt to their new form of perception, learning to interpret sensor data as naturally as they once processed visual and auditory input. Wraithguard represent a similar application of the same technology, though on a smaller scale. These constructs stand roughly the height of a living Aeldari, but possess none of the grace and fluidity that characterizes their living kin. Wraithguard move with mechanical precision, their wraithbone bodies controlled by spirits who lack the sensory feedback necessary for natural movement. They carry wraith cannons or D-scythes, devastating weapons that tear holes in reality itself. The wraith cannon fires a projectile that exists partially in the warp, the round passing through physical armor as if it were not there before detonating inside the target. D-scythes project a wave of dimensional instability that causes matter to simply cease existing, leaving no remains or debris behind. Deploying Wraithguard requires a spirit seer, a specialized psyker who can communicate with the dead and coordinate their actions. The spirits piloting Wraithguard constructs perceive the world too differently from the living to respond effectively to conventional orders. The Spirit Seer bridges this gap, their psychic abilities allowing them to translate tactical requirements into forms the dead can understand and execute. They also provide emotional support to spirits who might struggle with their disconnection from physical existence, helping them maintain focus on their duties rather than dwelling on what they have lost. Grav tanks and skimmers provide mobility and heavy firepower that infantry cannot match. The Falcon Grav tank serves as the primary transport for aspect warriors, its anti-gravitic drives allowing it to skim across terrain at high speed, while its pulse laser and shuriken cannon engage enemy forces. The Falcon can carry a full squad of warriors in its troop compartment, deploying them directly into combat zones before providing fire support. Wave Serpents fulfill a similar role, but incorporate energy field projectors that absorb incoming fire, making them significantly more survivable when operating in contested areas. Fire Prisms mount massive prism cannons that can fire focused beams or dispersed blasts depending on tactical requirements, their firepower capable of destroying enemy armor or eliminating entire infantry squads. The Viper serves as a light attack vehicle, its open cockpit design allowing for rapid deployment and extraction. Vipers typically operate in squadrons, their speed and maneuverability allowing them to engage enemy flanks or pursue retreating forces. Each Viper mounts a heavy weapon on its nose, with options including bright lances, star cannons, or missile launchers depending on the mission profile. The vehicle's small size and speed make it difficult to target effectively, while its firepower exceeds what its appearance would suggest. Warwalkers provide mobile heavy weapons platforms that combine the firepower of vehicles with the flexibility of infantry. These bipedal constructs stand taller than a human but smaller than a Wraith Lord, their open cockpit allowing a single pilot to control their movement and weapons. Warwalkers typically mount two heavy weapons, their stabilization systems allowing them to fire while moving across difficult terrain that would immobilize wheeled or tracked vehicles. They often deploy in squadrons, their concentrated firepower capable of eliminating threats that individual infantry squads could not engage effectively. The Avatar of Kine represents the most powerful asset a craftworld can deploy, though summoning it requires desperate circumstances and carries significant risks. Each craftworld maintains a shrine to Kine where a fragment of the shattered war god's essence remains imprisoned in molten iron. When the craftworld faces existential threats, the Exarchs and Farseers perform rituals to awaken this fragment, allowing it to manifest as a towering construct of molten metal and divine fury. The Avatar stands 3 times the height of an Aeldari warrior, its body composed of iron heated to temperatures that would vaporize normal matter. The Wailing Doom, a massive two-handed weapon that shifts between sword and spear configurations, serves as the Avatar's primary armament. The Avatar's presence on the battlefield affects every Aeldari nearby, their connection to Kine resonating with the war god's manifested essence. Warriors fight with enhanced fury and coordination, their movements synchronized as if guided by a single consciousness. The Avatar itself fights with skill that transcends mortal ability, its combat techniques drawing from the collective experience of Kine's countless battles across millions of years. Enemy forces find themselves paralyzed by supernatural dread when facing the Avatar, their courage failing as they confront a literal god of war made manifest. Summoning the Avatar requires sacrifice, typically one of the Exarchs who volunteer to serve as the vessel through which Kine's essence manifests. The chosen Exarch enters the shrine and approaches the molten iron prison, their armor's protective systems failing as they step into temperatures that would instantly incinerate unprotected flesh. The Exarch's body burns away as Kine's essence flows into the armor, using it as a framework around which to construct the Avatar's form. The Exarch's spirit merges with Kine's fragment, their individual consciousness subsumed into the war god's greater awareness. When the battle ends and the Avatar returns to its shrine, the Exarch who served as its vessel is gone, their sacrifice remembered, but their individual existence ended. Craftworld tactical doctrine emphasizes speed, precision, and the application of overwhelming force at decisive points. Aeldari commanders avoid prolonged engagements or battles of attrition, recognizing that their limited numbers make such conflicts unwinnable regardless of individual warrior quality. Instead, they identify critical objectives whose capture or destruction will achieve strategic goals, then concentrate sufficient force to accomplish those objectives before enemy reinforcements can respond. This approach requires perfect intelligence about enemy dispositions and capabilities, information typically provided by rangers operating ahead of the main force or through farseer divination. The use of webway portals for deployment gives Craftworld forces strategic mobility that few other species can match. A war host can assemble in the webway, march through passages that exist outside normal space, and emerge directly at their target through gates that might be thousands of light years from the Craftworld itself. This capability allows the Aeldari to strike anywhere in the galaxy with minimal warning, their forces appearing as if from nowhere to attack objectives that enemies assumed were secure. The sudden appearance of Aeldari forces behind defensive lines or in supposedly safe rear areas creates confusion and panic, disrupting enemy command structures and forcing them to respond to threats they never anticipated. After completing their objectives, Craftworld forces withdraw through the same webway portals they used for deployment, disappearing as quickly as they arrived. This hit-and-run approach frustrates enemies who prepare for conventional warfare involving prolonged campaigns and territorial conquest. The Aeldari have no interest in holding ground or engaging in the grinding attrition that characterizes warfare between the Imperium and its enemies. They strike, accomplish their goals, and vanish, leaving enemies to wonder why they were attacked and whether additional strikes might follow. This psychological dimension of Craftworld warfare proves as valuable as the physical damage inflicted, as enemies must divert resources to defending against possible Aeldari attacks rather than concentrating their forces for offensive operations. The prescient coordination provided by farseers elevates Craftworld tactical execution beyond what conventional military analysis could achieve. A farseer examining an upcoming battle perceives not just the current disposition of forces, but how those forces will move and respond to different stimuli. They see which enemy units will break under pressure and which will hold firm, which commanders will make mistakes, and which will adapt effectively to changing circumstances. This knowledge allows autarchs to plan operations that exploit enemy weaknesses before those weaknesses become apparent through conventional observation. The Aeldari strike at the precise moment when enemy defenses are weakest, concentrate their forces against units that will rout rather than fighting to the death, and avoid engagements where the enemy's advantages would prove decisive. Human observers who have witnessed Craftworld military operations often describe them as impossibly coordinated, with different elements of the Aeldari force executing complex maneuvers in perfect synchronization without any visible communication. This coordination emerges from the psychic connection that all Aeldari share, allowing them to sense each other's intentions and respond without requiring verbal orders. The autarch's commands flow through this psychic network, reaching every warrior simultaneously and allowing instantaneous responses to changing battlefield conditions. Combined with the farseer's precognitive guidance, this psychic coordination creates a military force that seems to anticipate and counter every enemy action before it occurs. The decision to rouse the dead from their rest within the Infinity Circuit represents one of the most controversial practices in Craftworld society. When an Aeldari dies and their spirit stone is placed within the circuit, they enter a form of peaceful existence where their consciousness merges with the collective awareness of all who came before. The dead perceive events throughout the Craftworld through the Wraithbone network, communicate with each other in ways that transcend physical language, and provide guidance to the living when consulted. This existence, while fundamentally different from physical life, offers a form of contentment that the souls find preferable to the alternative of consumption by Slaanesh. The dead have escaped the burden of physical existence, freed from the constant threat of she who thirsts that haunts every living Aeldari. To summon these souls back into physical constructs disrupts this peace, forcing them to experience a crude approximation of embodiment that bears little resemblance to the grace and sensation they knew in life. The dead perceive the material world through sensors that translate physical phenomena into data streams their consciousness can process. They move bodies of wraithbone that respond to thought commands but lack the fluid responsiveness of living flesh. The experience disorients even spirits who volunteered for this duty, their consciousness struggling to interpret sensory information that arrives in forms completely unlike what they remember from life. Touch becomes pressure readings, sight transforms into electromagnetic spectrum analysis, and sound manifests as vibration patterns detected through the construct's structure rather than heard through ears. The practice emerged from desperate necessity during the dark millennia following the fall. Craftworlds found themselves facing threats that their limited populations of living warriors could not defeat alone. The aspect warriors, skilled as they were, numbered in the thousands rather than the millions that pre-fall Aeldari armies could deploy. Guardian militias provided additional numbers, but lacked the training and equipment to stand against the most dangerous enemies. The Craftworlds needed additional military strength, and the only available source was the billions of souls resting within their infinity circuits. The first Spirit Seers developed techniques for transferring these souls into wraithbone constructs, creating warriors who could fight without risking living Aeldari lives. Wraithguard formed the most common type of wraith construct deployed by Craftworlds. These infantry-scale warriors stand roughly the same height as living Aeldari, but possess none of the natural grace that characterizes their living kin. The wraithbone bodies move with mechanical precision, each step deliberate and measured as the piloting spirit adjusts to controlling a form that responds to mental commands rather than instinctive muscle movements. The spirits piloting Wraithguard typically come from warriors who died in battle and chose to continue serving their craftworld rather than resting peacefully within the circuit. Their consciousness retains memories of combat and tactical training from life, but translating that knowledge into effective action through their new bodies requires significant adjustment. The weapons carried by Wraithguard reflect their role as heavy assault infantry designed to eliminate targets that conventional forces cannot engage effectively. Wraith cannons fire projectiles that exist partially in the warp, the rounds phasing through physical armor and detonating inside the target. The weapon's operation requires the spirit piloting the construct to briefly touch the materium, channeling a fragment of warp energy into the projectile as it fires. This process feels deeply unnatural to the dead, forcing them to interact with the realm that threatens to consume them if their spirit stone ever fails. The alternative weapon, the D-Scythe, projects waves of dimensional instability that cause matter within the affected area to cease existing. Targets struck by D-Scythes simply vanish, their component atoms scattered across dimensions beyond recovery or resurrection. Wraithblades serve as close assault variants, equipped with massive ghost swords or ghost axes paired with force shields. These weapons channel psychic energy along their blades, allowing them to cleave through armor and flesh with equal ease. The spirits piloting Wraithblades must possess not just warrior training, but also some psychic sensitivity, as the weapons require active mental focus to maintain their energy fields. Wraithblade squads advance into close combat with the same measured precision as Wraithguard, their movements lacking the fluid aggression of living howling banshees or striking scorpions, but compensating through sheer durability and devastating close-range firepower. The coordination of Wraithguard and Wraithblade squads requires a Spirit Seer, a specialized psyker who has walked both the path of the seer and spent time communing extensively with the Infinity Circuit. Spirit Seers develop the ability to perceive and communicate with the dead, their consciousness capable of bridging the gap between living thought patterns and the altered awareness of spirits within the circuit. On the battlefield, the Spirit Seer maintains constant psychic contact with the Wraith constructs under their command, translating tactical situations into forms the dead can comprehend and execute. The spirits perceive combat differently than the living, their sensor-mediated awareness making it difficult to distinguish between important targets and irrelevant background elements. The Spirit Seer filters this information, highlighting threats and objectives while suppressing distracting details. The relationship between Spirit Seer and Wraith construct goes beyond simple command and control. The Spirit Seer provides emotional support to spirits struggling with the disorientation of physical embodiment, offering reassurance and helping them maintain focus on their duties. Some spirits experience profound distress at being forced back into crude approximations of physical form, their consciousness rebelling against the sensory disconnection they experience. The spirit seer must calm these troubled souls, reminding them of why they chose to serve and helping them find purpose in their current existence. This emotional labor proves as exhausting as the psychic effort required to coordinate the construct's actions, leaving spirit seers drained after extended engagements. Wraithlords represent a more sophisticated application of the same technology, housing the spirits of particularly skilled warriors within larger constructs that function as mobile weapon platforms. A Wraithlord stands roughly twice the height of a living Aeldari, its wraithbone body incorporating weapon mounts, sensor arrays, and the psychic interface systems necessary for the pilot spirit to control it effectively. The spirits chosen for Wraithlord duty typically come from exarchs, autarchs, or other warriors whose combat experience and tactical knowledge make them valuable assets worth the trauma of embodiment. These spirits volunteered for this duty before their deaths, understanding that their skills could serve their craftworld more effectively in a Wraithlord than in peaceful rest within the circuit. The sensory experience of piloting a Wraithlord differs significantly from inhabiting smaller Wraith constructs. The Wraithlord's sophisticated sensor suite provides information across multiple spectrums simultaneously, the spirit's consciousness processing visual, thermal, electromagnetic, and psychic data in parallel. This expanded perception allows Wraithlord pilots to perceive threats that living warriors might miss, detecting concealed enemies through their heat signatures or identifying psychers through the warp energy they emanate. The construct's size and strength enable it to carry weapons too large for infantry, with typical loadouts including combinations of flamers, bright lances, star cannons, and missile launchers. The spirit controls these weapons through direct mental interface, targeting systems responding to thought commands with precision that purely mechanical systems cannot match. Wraithlords retain more of their personality and tactical judgment than the spirits piloting Wraithguard or Wraithblades. The more sophisticated psychic interface allows them to maintain clearer awareness of their situation and make independent tactical decisions rather than requiring constant guidance from a spirit seer. Experienced Wraithlord pilots develop techniques for managing their disconnection from physical sensation, learning to interpret sensor data as naturally as they once processed visual and auditory input. Some pilots report that they eventually stop missing physical embodiment, finding that their new form offers capabilities their living bodies could never match. Others never fully adapt, their consciousness perpetually mourning the loss of true sensation, even as they continue serving their craftworld with unwavering dedication. Wraithseers represent the rarest and most powerful type of Wraith construct, housing the spirits of seers who possessed significant psychic ability in life. These constructs combine the physical capabilities of a Wraithlord with psychic powers that allow them to manipulate the battlefield through more than just firepower. A Wraithseer can perceive the skein of fate despite their embodiment in Wraithbone, their consciousness still capable of touching the immaterium and reading the patterns of possibility that extend from current events. They use this ability to guide other Wraith constructs with even greater precision than Spirit Seers can achieve, their understanding of both psychic phenomena and combat tactics creating uniquely effective battlefield commanders. The weapons carried by Wraithseers reflect their dual nature as warriors and psychers. They typically bear D-cannons, larger versions of the D-sides carried by Wraithblades that project dimensional rifts capable of eliminating entire squads or light vehicles. The Wraithseer channels psychic energy through these weapons, enhancing their already devastating effects with warp-derived power. Their psychic abilities also allow them to protect nearby units through supernatural shields or enhance their allies' combat effectiveness through blessing and foresight. Some Wraithseers develop the ability to commune directly with the Infinity Circuit, even while embodied, drawing upon the collective knowledge and power of all the dead within to fuel their psychic abilities. The creation of a Wraithseer requires the voluntary participation of a seer who understands exactly what they are agreeing to endure. The transition from peaceful existence within the circuit to embodiment in a wraith construct proves traumatic for any spirit, but seers experience additional difficulties due to their heightened psychic sensitivity. They perceive the crude nature of their new form with painful clarity, understanding intellectually and spiritually how much they have lost. The wraithbone body cannot channel psychic energy with the same efficiency as living flesh, forcing the wraithseer to work harder to achieve effects that would have come naturally when they lived. Despite these challenges, some seers choose this path because their skills and knowledge can serve their craftworld more effectively in embodied form than as advisory voices within the circuit. Wraith Knights represent the pinnacle of wraith construct technology, towering war machines that stand as tall as Imperial Knights or smaller Titan-class walkers. Unlike other wraith constructs that house single spirits, Wraith Knights bond with two souls simultaneously, typically siblings or other closely related kin who share deep emotional connections in life. The dual pilot configuration emerged from early experiments with larger constructs, when Bonesingers discovered that single spirits could not effectively manage the massive amount of sensory data and weapons control required to operate such large machines. The solution involved bonding pairs of spirits whose consciousness could merge partially while maintaining individual awareness, creating a Gestalt entity capable of processing the information streams necessary for effective Wraith Knight operation. The relationship between bonded spirits within a Wraith Knight transcends what living Aeldari experience even through their natural psychic connections. The two consciousness merge at their edges, thoughts and perceptions flowing between them without the barriers that separate distinct individuals. One spirit might focus on movement and positioning, while the other handles targeting and weapons control, their division of labor occurring through intuitive understanding rather than conscious negotiation. The bond allows them to function as a single entity when necessary, while maintaining enough separation to provide multiple perspectives on tactical situations. Siblings who shared close relationships in life adapt to this bonding most successfully, their existing emotional connections providing a foundation for the deeper merger required. Wraith Knights carry weapons that would be impossible for smaller constructs to deploy effectively. Heavy Wraith cannons fire projectiles the size of humans, their warp-phased rounds capable of destroying main battle tanks with single shots. Ghostglaives serve as massive close combat weapons, their psychically charged blades cleaving through armor plating meters thick. Sun cannons project beams of focused thermal energy that can melt through fortifications, while scatter shields generate protective barriers that deflect incoming fire. The Wraith Knight's size and firepower make it capable of engaging targets that would require multiple Wraith Lords or entire aspect warrior squads to defeat, its presence on the battlefield often proving decisive in conflicts where conventional forces reach stalemate. The emotional and spiritual cost of deploying Wraith constructs weighs heavily on Craftworld society, despite the military advantages these warriors provide. Every spirit summoned from the Infinity Circuit experiences trauma from being forced back into physical form, their peaceful rest disrupted to serve military necessity. The living Aeldari understand this cost intellectually, but the alternative of allowing their craftworld to fall to enemies proves equally unacceptable. Spiritseers who coordinate Wraith construct operations carry particular psychological burdens, their constant communion with traumatized and disoriented spirits exposing them to the dead's suffering. Many Spiritseers develop deep melancholy from this work, their awareness of the price paid by the dead for each victory making triumph feel hollow. Different craftworlds maintain varying attitudes toward the use of Wraith constructs, these differences reflecting their broader philosophical approaches to survival and warfare. Aeldari relies on Wraith constructs more heavily than any other craftworld, this dependence emerging from the catastrophic losses the vessel suffered during Hive Fleet Kraken's assault. The Tyranid invasion killed billions of Aeldari's population, leaving the craftworld with insufficient living warriors to defend itself effectively. The survivors had no choice but to rouse massive numbers of dead from the Infinity Circuit, creating armies of Wraith constructs that now outnumber living warriors. Aeldari's forces deploy Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords in formations that other craftworlds would consider excessive, their tactical doctrine built around these constructs, rather than treating them as specialized assets. The psychological impact of this dependence affects Eandon's entire society. The living walk among constructs housing their ancestors, friends, and loved ones, constantly reminded of those they have lost. The Spirit Seers work without rest, their duties requiring them to maintain communion with thousands of embodied spirits simultaneously. The Craftworlds Infinity Circuit hums with the awareness of spirits who know they will likely be summoned for embodiment, their peaceful existence perpetually threatened by the possibility of being called to serve. Eandon's Aeldari accept this situation as necessary for survival, but it colors their entire culture with an atmosphere of melancholy and loss that visitors from other craftworlds find deeply unsettling. Biel-Tan, by contrast, deploys Wraith constructs sparingly despite possessing the population to create large numbers of them. The Craftworld's aggressive philosophy emphasizes the primacy of living warriors, viewing Wraith constructs as admissions of weakness rather than valuable military assets. Biel-Tan's aspect warrior shrines maintain that true martial excellence can only be achieved through living bodies, that the disconnection experienced by spirits in Wraithbone constructs inherently limits their effectiveness regardless of the pilot's skill. The Craftworld deploys Wraith constructs only when facing threats that living forces absolutely cannot defeat alone, treating each such deployment as a regrettable necessity rather than a tactical option to be embraced. Aeldari maintains similarly conservative attitudes toward Wraith construct deployment, though their reasoning differs from Biel-Tan's martial pride. Aeldari's strict interpretation of the path system extends to respecting the dead's right to peaceful rest within the Infinity Circuit. The Craftworld's leadership views summoning spirits for embodiment as a violation of the natural order, disrupting the cycle of existence that the path system exists to maintain. They deploy Wraith constructs only during existential crises when the Craftworld's survival hangs in immediate balance, preferring to rely on their extensive ranger networks and preemptive strikes to prevent situations from escalating to that point. Ulthwé falls between these extremes, deploying Wraith constructs regularly, but not to the extent that Eandon's desperate circumstances require. The Craftworld's constant proximity to the Eye of Terror means they face threats severe enough to justify rousing the dead, but their large population of living warriors prevents them from becoming dependent on Wraith constructs. Ulthwé's Spirit Seers maintain particularly close relationships with the spirits they summon, spending extensive time in communion with them both before and after embodiment. This practice helps minimize the trauma experienced by summoned spirits, though it cannot eliminate the fundamental disorientation that physical embodiment creates. The spirits themselves hold varying attitudes toward embodiment based on their individual personalities and the circumstances of their deaths. Warriors who fell in battle often volunteer readily for Wraith construct duty, viewing it as a continuation of service they were already committed to. These spirits adapt to embodiment more successfully than those summoned reluctantly, their sense of purpose helping them cope with the sensory disconnection they experience. Spirits who died peacefully after long lives typically resist embodiment more strongly, having fully embraced their rest within the circuit and seeing no reason to return to the conflicts of the material world. Spirit Seers try to honor these preferences when possible, though desperate circumstances sometimes force them to summon spirits regardless of their willingness. The technical process of transferring a spirit from the Infinity Circuit into a Wraith construct requires precise psychic manipulation and sophisticated Wraithbone engineering. Bonesingers create the construct's body with special attention to the psychic interface systems that will allow the spirit to control it, singing the Wraithbone into configurations that can channel consciousness into physical action. The spirit stone containing the chosen soul is removed from the Infinity Circuit and installed in a specially prepared chamber within the construct's torso, its position corresponding roughly to where the heart would sit in a living body. Spirit Seers guide the spirit's consciousness through the transition, helping it establish connections with the construct systems and learn to interpret the sensory data those systems provide. The initial moments of embodiment prove particularly disorienting for the spirit, their consciousness suddenly flooded with information from sensors they have no experience using. The Spirit Seer maintains constant contact during this period, filtering the data streams and helping the spirit focus on basic functions like movement and perception before attempting more complex operations. Learning to walk in a Wraith construct takes hours or even days depending on the spirit's adaptability, their consciousness struggling to coordinate the construct's limbs through thought commands rather than instinctive muscle control. Weapon operation requires additional training, the spirit learning to aim and fire through targeting systems that translate their intentions into physical action. Some spirits never fully adapt to embodiment despite extensive training and support from spirit seers. These individuals experience perpetual disorientation, their consciousness unable to reconcile the crude approximation of physical form with their memories of true embodiment. They function adequately in combat through sheer determination and the Spirit Seer's constant guidance, but they suffer throughout their service. When battles end and these spirits return to the Infinity Circuit, they often require extensive communion with other souls to recover from the trauma of embodiment. The most severely affected spirits refuse all future summons, their consciousness retreating deep into the circuit where Spirit Seers cannot easily reach them. Human commanders who have faced Craftworld forces often fail to recognize Wraith constructs as anything other than sophisticated robots, their unfamiliarity with Aeldari technology preventing them from understanding that each construct houses a conscious soul. This misunderstanding leads to tactical errors, as Imperial forces treat Wraith constructs as expendable units that can be destroyed without consequence. The Aeldari recognize every Wraith construct loss as a tragedy, each destroyed spirit stone representing an irreplaceable soul condemned to consumption by Slaanesh. The recovery of damaged spirit stones from destroyed constructs takes absolute priority during Craftworld operations, with entire squads risking themselves to retrieve fallen stones before withdrawing from the battlefield. The relationship between the Craftworld Aeldari and the forces of chaos transcends simple enmity or military rivalry. Every Aeldari exists in a state of perpetual spiritual warfare against Slaanesh, the chaos god their ancestors inadvertently created through millennia of unchecked hedonism and depravity. The moment an Aeldari dies without the protection of a spirit stone, their soul becomes forfeit to she who thirsts, drawn inexorably into the warp where Slaanesh awaits to consume it in an eternity of torment. This threat shapes every aspect of Craftworld existence, from the path system designed to prevent the obsessive behavior that birthed Slaanesh to the military strategies employed when fighting chaos forces. The Aeldari understand that their war against chaos differs fundamentally from the conflicts they wage against other species. Orcs can be defeated and driven off, Tyranids can be misdirected toward other prey, even the Necrons can be avoided or contained. Chaos represents an existential threat that can never be truly defeated, only endured and resisted until the final extinction of their species. The proximity of Ulthwé to the Eye of Terror means that Craftworld faces chaos incursions more frequently than any other major vessel. Demonic entities constantly probe the barriers between real space and the immaterium near the eye, searching for any weakness through which they can manifest. The Craftworld Seers maintain perpetual vigilance against these threats, their precognitive abilities allowing them to detect demonic incursions before they fully manifest. When a breach occurs, Ulthwé's forces respond with overwhelming speed and violence, recognizing that allowing demons to establish themselves in real space creates dangers that extend far beyond immediate military threats. A single demon that escapes containment might possess unsuspecting victims, corrupt local populations, or create the psychic resonance necessary for larger incursions. The Aeldari have witnessed countless worlds fall to chaos through such seemingly minor breaches, their long memories preserving knowledge of catastrophes that occurred millennia before humanity even achieved spaceflight. Craftworld forces employ specific tactics when engaging demonic enemies, their strategies developed through thousands of years of constant warfare against warp entities. Psychic abilities prove particularly effective against demons, as these entities exist primarily in the immaterium and maintain only tenuous connections to physical reality. Warlocks and Farseers can disrupt these connections through focused psychic assault, banishing demons back to the warp without requiring physical destruction of their manifested forms. The Witchblades carried by Warlocks serve as particularly effective weapons against demonic foes, the psychically charged blades cutting through both physical manifestation and spiritual essence simultaneously. Dark Reapers position themselves to deliver concentrated fire on demon clusters, their training in sustained bombardment allowing them to eliminate multiple targets before the entities can close to melee range, where their supernatural abilities prove most dangerous. The Aeldari recognize that humanity's Imperium serves as an unwitting bulwark against chaos expansion, the Moan Keith's vast armies and endless numbers providing resistance that slows the Dark God's advance across the galaxy. This recognition creates situations where Craftworld forces fight alongside Imperial troops against shared chaos threats, though these alliances remain temporary and fraught with mutual suspicion. The Aeldari view humans as crude primitives whose psychic potential makes them dangerously susceptible to chaos corruption, while Imperial commanders regard the Aeldari as Xenos, whose very existence violates the Emperor's decree that humanity alone should inherit the galaxy. These philosophical incompatibilities prevent genuine cooperation, but desperate circumstances sometimes force both species to recognize that allowing chaos victory serves neither group's interests. The 13th Black Crusade demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of such cooperation. Abaddon's forces threatened to overwhelm Cadia, the fortress world that anchored the pylons preventing the Eye of Terror's expansion. Multiple Craftworlds deployed forces to reinforce the Imperial defenders, recognizing that Cadia's fall would unleash catastrophic consequences affecting the entire galaxy. Ulthwé committed substantial military assets to the defense, their seers having foreseen that this battle represented a critical juncture in the galaxy's fate. Biel-Tan sent war hosts despite their usual focus on maiden worlds, understanding that chaos ascendancy would make their dream of Aeldari resurgence impossible. Alatok's Rangers provided intelligence about Chaos fleet movements and assassinated key traitor commanders, their interventions occurring far from the main battle lines where Imperial forces would never witness them. The cooperation during Cadia's defense remained limited and tactical rather than strategic. Aeldari forces operated independently, coordinating their actions through their own command structures rather than submitting to Imperial authority. When Craftworld objectives diverged from Imperial priorities, the Aeldari pursued their own goals without consulting their temporary allies. Imperial commanders who attempted to issue orders to Aeldari forces found themselves ignored or met with responses that made clear the Craftworld warriors answered to their own autarchs and Farseers alone. The Aeldari withdrew when their seers determined that remaining served no purpose, their departure occurring without warning or explanation to the Imperial forces they had been supporting moments before. This behavior reinforced Imperial prejudices about the Aeldari's unreliability and alien nature, while the Craftworld warriors viewed human expectations of subordination as typical Moan Keith arrogance. The fall of Cadia and the subsequent opening of the Great Rift fundamentally altered the strategic situation facing all Craftworlds. The massive warp storm that now bisects the galaxy has created unprecedented instability throughout real space and the Immaterium alike. Demonic incursions occur with frequency that would have seemed impossible before the rift's opening, entire star systems falling to chaos corruption in the time it once took for single worlds to succumb. The Webway has suffered extensive damage from the increased warp turbulence, passages that remained stable for millennia suddenly collapsing or becoming corrupted by chaos influence. Several Craftworlds found themselves cut off from traditional routes, forced to navigate through dangerous or unknown passages to reach destinations they could previously access through well-charted tunnels. The conflict between Craftworlds and the Imperium of Man extends beyond temporary alliances against chaos to include direct warfare over resources and territory that both species claim. Maiden worlds represent the most frequent source of these conflicts, as the Aeldari view these planets as rightfully theirs regardless of whether humans have since colonized them. When Craftworld scouts discover that Imperial settlers have established colonies on Maiden Worlds, the response varies based on which Craftworld makes the discovery and the strategic importance of the planet in question. Biel-Tan responds with immediate military action, their war hosts deploying to eliminate the human presence through overwhelming force. The Craftworld's warriors show no mercy to colonists they consider illegal squatters on Aeldari territory, their attacks often resulting in complete extermination of human populations that might number in the millions. Other Craftworlds take more measured approaches, though the ultimate goal remains the same. Aladok's rangers might infiltrate the colony and assassinate key leaders, creating chaos that causes the settlement to collapse without requiring full military intervention. Ulthway's Farseers examine the threads of fate to determine whether the human colony will survive long-term or face destruction from other threats, sometimes choosing to allow natural events to eliminate the settlement rather than expending Craftworld resources. Samehand coordinates with exodite populations on contested worlds, providing military support that allows the agrarian Aeldari to drive off human encroachment through their own efforts rather than requiring direct Craftworld intervention. The Imperium's response to these attacks depends largely on the strategic value of the targeted colony and the military assets available to respond. Frontier worlds with limited defenses might be completely destroyed before Imperial reinforcements can arrive, their populations massacred, and all trace of human presence eliminated. The Aeldari typically withdraw before Imperial Navy vessels reach the system, using webway portals to evacuate their forces and leaving no targets for human retaliation. More valuable colonies, or those located near major Imperial strongholds, receive rapid reinforcement, forcing the Aeldari to either commit additional forces or abandon their assault. These escalations can result in prolonged conflicts where both sides deploy substantial military assets, though the Aeldari generally withdraw if the cost of victory appears likely to exceed the strategic value of the objective. The fundamental incompatibility between Aeldari and human perspectives on these conflicts makes negotiated settlements nearly impossible. The Craftworlds view Maiden Worlds as their property by right of their ancestors' work in seeding these planets with life millions of years ago. The fact that humans subsequently colonized these worlds carries no moral or legal weight in Aeldari judgment, as they consider humanity to be primitive newcomers with no legitimate claim to territory that predates human civilization by epochs. Imperial authorities, conversely, recognize no alien species' right to any world that humanity has settled, viewing the Aeldari attacks as unprovoked Xeno's aggression against loyal Imperial citizens. The Imperium's official policy demands the extermination of all Xeno's threats, making compromise with Craftworld demands impossible, even when individual commanders might recognize the practical benefits of avoiding conflict. Some conflicts arise from misunderstandings or accidents rather than deliberate aggression from either side. Craftworld rangers operating covertly on human worlds sometimes find themselves discovered by Imperial authorities, leading to firefights that escalate into larger confrontations. Human explorers stumbling upon webway gates or ancient Aeldari ruins might inadvertently trigger defensive systems or disturb sites the Craftworlds consider sacred, prompting military responses that the humans never anticipated. The Aeldari's tendency to act based on farseer visions that predict future threats means they sometimes attack Imperial forces that have not yet committed any hostile act, their preemptive strikes appearing as unprovoked aggression to human commanders who lack context for understanding the Craftworld's motivations. The relationship between Craftworld Aeldari and their Drukhari cousins in Camorra represents one of the most complex and emotionally charged dynamics in Aeldari society. Both groups descended from the same empire that fell when Slaanesh was born, but they chose radically different paths to survival. The Craftworlds developed the Path System and Spirit Stones to protect their souls from she who thirsts while maintaining some semblance of the civilization their ancestors built. The Drukhari rejected this approach entirely, instead sustaining themselves through torture and the consumption of stolen souls. Every act of cruelty and suffering the Drukhari inflict temporarily sates Slaanesh's hunger for their souls, allowing them to survive without spirit stones, but at the cost of becoming monsters who must perpetually feed the Dark Prince through their depravity. The Craftworld Aeldari view the Drukhari with a mixture of horror, pity, and contempt. They recognize that their dark kin face the same existential threat from Slaanesh, but chose a path of deliberate evil rather than accepting the discipline and constraints of the Craftworld way of life. The Drukhari's raids on real space civilizations to capture slaves for torture represent everything the Craftworlds rejected about their pre-fall ancestors' descent into hedonistic excess. Yet the Craftworld Aeldari cannot entirely condemn the Drukhari without acknowledging that both groups emerged from the same corrupt society, that the capacity for such depravity exists within every Aeldari soul. The path system exists precisely because the Craftworlds recognize this potential for corruption within themselves, understanding that without constant discipline, they could easily become as monstrous as their Comorate cousins. Direct conflicts between Craftworlds and Drukhari occur regularly despite their shared ancestry. Drukhari raiding parties sometimes target Craftworld territories or attack Exodite worlds under Craftworld protection, viewing these targets as sources of particularly valuable slaves due to their psychic potential and the quality of their spirit stones. The Craftworlds respond to such raids with fury that exceeds their reactions to attacks from other species, viewing Drukhari predation on fellow Aeldari as the ultimate betrayal of their shared heritage. Biel-Tan has fought several prolonged campaigns against specific Drukhari cabals, their war hosts pursuing the raiders back through the webway and striking at their holdings within Comora itself. These retaliatory attacks rarely achieve lasting results, as the Dark City's labyrinthine structure and the Drukhari's intimate knowledge of its passages give them overwhelming advantages when fighting on their home territory. Trade relationships exist between some Craftworlds and Drukhari factions, despite the philosophical gulf separating them. Certain Archons maintain contacts with Craftworld seers, exchanging information about webway passages, or providing mercenary support in return for spirit stones or other resources the Drukhari cannot easily obtain themselves. These arrangements remain secret and unofficial, as both sides recognize that their respective populations would view such cooperation as unacceptable collaboration with enemies. The Craftworld Aeldari who participate in these exchanges justify them as necessary evils, arguing that the intelligence gained or military support provided serves their people's survival, even if the methods employed prove distasteful. The Drukhari view the transactions purely as business opportunities, their mercenary nature allowing them to fight for anyone willing to pay their prices regardless of shared ancestry or philosophical alignment. The emergence of the Inari death cult has created the most significant schism within Craftworld society since the fall itself. Ivrain, once a daughter of Morai Heg from Biel-Tan, claimed to have been resurrected by Ennead, the nascent Aeldari god of the dead whose awakening has been prophesied for millennia. She preached that Ennead could be fully awakened through the deaths of Aeldari warriors who willingly sacrificed themselves to feed the god's growing power, and that once awakened, Ennead would have the strength to battle Slaanesh directly and free the Aeldari from she who thirsts eternal threat. This message resonated powerfully with Aeldari from all factions, offering hope for salvation that went beyond mere survival through spirit stones and the Infinity Circuit. The Inari recruit from Craftworlds, Drukhari, Exodites, and outcasts alike, their movement transcending the traditional divisions that separate different Aeldari groups. Ivrain's followers abandon the path system, arguing that the rigid structure designed to prevent corruption no longer serves its purpose when Ennead offers the possibility of genuine freedom from Slaanesh. They fight alongside former enemies, with Craftworld warriors standing beside Drukhari and Harlequins in service to their shared god. The Inari's military forces combine elements from all Aeldari factions, their war hosts including aspect warriors, incubi, wraith constructs, and other troops that would never cooperate under normal circumstances. The response from established Craftworld leadership varies dramatically based on each vessel's culture and the specific circumstances of their encounters with the Inari. Biel-Tan suffered catastrophic damage when Ennead's partial awakening shattered the craftworld into multiple fragments, an event that killed billions and fundamentally altered the vessel's structure. Many surviving Biel-Tan Aeldari blame Ivrain and the Inari for this catastrophe, viewing the death cult's actions as reckless endangerment that nearly destroyed their home. Others interpret the same events as proof of Ennead's power and the validity of Ivrain's prophecies, arguing that the gods' awakening represents their only hope for true salvation despite the immediate costs. This division has created bitter conflicts within Biel-Tan's surviving population, with families and clans split between those who embrace the Inari and those who view them as dangerous heretics. Ulthway's response has been more measured, with Eldred Ulthrin himself participating in efforts to awaken Ennead while maintaining reservations about the Inari's methods and philosophy. The ancient Farseer recognizes that Ennead represents a potential solution to the existential threat facing all Aeldari, but he questions whether the costs required to fully awaken the god justify the benefits that awakening might provide. Eldred's complex relationship with the Inari reflects broader attitudes within Ulthway, where many Aeldari see value in the movement's goals, while remaining skeptical about abandoning the path system and other structures that have preserved their civilization since the fall. The Craftworld has provided limited support to Inari operations when Farseer visions suggest such cooperation serves Ulthway's interests, but this support remains conditional and tactical rather than representing full endorsement of Ivrain's cause. Aeldari has largely rejected the Inari, viewing the death cult as another form of dangerous obsession that threatens to lead the Aeldari down paths similar to those that caused the fall. The Craftworld's strict interpretation of the path system makes them deeply suspicious of any movement that encourages Aeldari to abandon the psychological structures designed to prevent corruption. Aeldari's leadership argues that Ennead's awakening remains uncertain, while the risks of pursuing it are immediate and severe, making the Inaris approach an unacceptable gamble with their species' survival. This rejection has driven many Aeldari Aeldari who feel drawn to Ivrain's message to leave their craftworld entirely, joining the growing ranks of Inari forces operating independently throughout the galaxy. Same Hands Clan-based culture has created unique responses to the Inari, with different kinship groups reaching their own conclusions about the movement's validity. Some clans have sent representatives to join Ivrain's forces while maintaining their ties to Same Hand, viewing service to Ennead as compatible with their clan obligations. Other clans reject the Inari entirely, arguing that abandoning the traditions and structures that preserved their people through the millennia since the fall represents foolish abandonment of proven methods in favor of uncertain promises. The Craftworld's leadership has avoided making official pronouncements about the Inari, allowing individual clans to make their own decisions while maintaining Same Hand's overall unity and independence. The practical military cooperation between Inari forces and Craftworld armies occurs regularly despite philosophical disagreements about the movement's ultimate goals. When facing threats that endanger all Aeldari regardless of factional affiliation, pragmatic necessity overrides ideological purity. Inari war hosts have fought alongside Craftworld forces against chaos incursions, tyrannid invasions, and other existential threats. These temporary alliances function smoothly at the tactical level, as all Aeldari share the psychic connections and cultural understanding that allow effective coordination. The Inari's willingness to embrace death in service to their god makes them valuable shock troops, their fearlessness in combat providing capabilities that more cautious Craftworld forces sometimes lack. The theological implications of Ennead's awakening extend beyond immediate military concerns to questions about the fundamental nature of Aeldari existence and their relationship with death. The traditional Craftworld approach treats death as a transition from physical life to existence within the infinity circuit, with the ultimate fate of these souls remaining uncertain. Aeneid offers the possibility of something more, a genuine afterlife free from Slaanesh's threat, where Aeldari souls might exist in peace rather than perpetual vigilance against consumption. This promise resonates particularly strongly with Aeldari who have lost loved ones or who face their own mortality, offering hope that goes beyond mere survival through spirit stones. Critics of the Inari point out that Aeneid's awakening remains incomplete and uncertain, that the god's ultimate power and intentions cannot be known until the awakening fully occurs. They argue that abandoning proven methods of protection against Slaanesh in favor of faith in an unproven deity represents dangerous wishful thinking that could lead to catastrophe. The fact that Aeneid's partial awakening caused massive destruction to Biel-Tan provides evidence supporting these concerns, demonstrating that the process of awakening the god carries immediate costs regardless of what benefits might eventually emerge. The debate continues throughout Craftworld society, with no consensus emerging about whether the Inari represent salvation or simply another form of the obsessive behavior that the path system exists to prevent. The Rana Dandra stands as the most significant prophecy in Craftworld theology, a vision of the final battle that will determine whether the Aeldari species survives or faces ultimate extinction. The prophecy describes a cataclysmic conflict where every living Aeldari will fight alongside the dead, where the gods themselves will manifest on the battlefield, and where the fate of the entire species will be decided in a single apocalyptic confrontation. Different Craftworlds interpret the Rana Dandra in varying ways, their perspectives shaped by their individual philosophies and the specific visions their farseers have received. Some seers believe the prophecy describes a literal battle against Slaanesh, a final confrontation where the Aeldari must defeat she who thirsts or be consumed entirely. Others interpret it more metaphorically, viewing the Rana Dandra as representing the cumulative choices and conflicts that will gradually determine whether their species endures or fades into extinction. Ulthway's farseers have studied the Rana Dandra more extensively than those of any other Craftworld, their proximity to the Eye of Terror giving them unique perspective on the prophecy's meaning. Eldred Ulthrin spent millennia attempting to manipulate events across the galaxy to create conditions favorable for Aeldari survival when the final battle occurs. His schemes involved countless other species, orchestrating conflicts and alliances that might seem unrelated to Aeldari interests, but which he believed would shift the balance of cosmic forces in ways that improved his people's chances. The ancient Farseer's interpretation suggests that the Rana Dandra represents not a single battle, but rather a convergence point where multiple conflicts and prophecies intersect, creating a moment where reality itself becomes malleable enough for fundamental changes to occur. Biel-Tan's warriors view the Rana Dandra through the lens of their belief in Ulthanash Shelwi, the rebirth. They interpret the final battle as the conflict that will precede the restoration of Aeldari dominance over the galaxy, a necessary purging that will eliminate their enemies and allow their empire to rise again from the ashes of the fall. This optimistic reading stands in stark contrast to darker interpretations that see the Rana Dandra as marking the Aeldari's final extinction. Their last desperate stand before Slaanesh consumes the remnants of their species. The fracturing of Biel-Tan during the 13th Black Crusade has forced the Craftworld seers to reconsider their interpretations, as the catastrophic damage they suffered seems to contradict their expectations of inevitable triumph. Aladok's seers emphasize the prophecy's ambiguity, arguing that the Rana Dandra's outcome remains undetermined and will be shaped by the choices the Aeldari make in the millennia leading up to it. This interpretation places tremendous weight on every decision, every battle, and every alliance, viewing them all as threads in the skein of fate that will ultimately weave together to create the conditions of the final conflict. The Craftworld's strategy of preemptive strikes against emerging threats reflects this philosophy, their forces working to eliminate dangers before they can grow into problems that might tip the balance unfavorably when the Rana Dandra finally occurs. The belief that all Aeldari will fight in the final battle carries particular significance for Craftworld society's relationship with the dead. The prophecy suggests that the souls within infinity circuits will somehow participate in the Rana Dandra, either through embodiment in wraith, constructs on an unprecedented scale, or through some other means not yet understood. This aspect of the prophecy provides some comfort to the living, as it implies that death does not mean abandoning the struggle for their species' survival. The dead within the circuits remain aware of this prophecy, their consciousness contemplating what role they might play when the final battle comes. Some spirits have volunteered to serve in wraith, constructs specifically to prepare for this eventuality, viewing their current embodiment as training for the greater conflict to come. The existential threats facing the Craftworlds have multiplied dramatically in recent millennia, each one representing a potential catalyst for the Rana Dandra, or simply another step toward gradual extinction. Hive fleet incursions pose particularly severe dangers, as the Tyranids consume everything in their path without regard for negotiation or deterrence. The Great Devourer has already destroyed countless maiden worlds, these planets stripped of all biological matter and left as lifeless rocks orbiting their stars. Craftworld forces engage Tyranid splinter fleets whenever possible, their strategy focusing on misdirecting the Hive fleets toward other prey or destroying synapse creatures to disrupt the swarm's coordination. These engagements prove costly regardless of their outcomes, as even successful defenses against Tyranid attacks typically result in casualties that the Craftworld's limited populations can ill afford. Aeldari suffered the most catastrophic Tyranid assault of any Craftworld when Hive Fleet Kraken attacked in the late 41st millennium. The invasion force that struck the Craftworld numbered in the billions, their swarm overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers despite the tactical superiority of Aeldari forces. The battle lasted for months, with fighting occurring throughout the Craftworld's domes and corridors as Tyranid organisms breached the hull and established infestation points deep within the vessel's interior. The Aeldari fought with desperate fury, knowing that defeat meant not just their deaths, but the consumption of their infinity circuit and the eternal damnation of all souls contained within. The Craftworld's population suffered catastrophic losses, with billions killed before the Tyranids were finally repelled through a combination of military action and psychic assault that disrupted the hive mind's control over the swarm. The aftermath of Kraken's assault left Aeldari fundamentally changed, its population so depleted that the Craftworld became dependent on Wraith constructs to maintain even basic defensive capabilities. The survivors roused massive numbers of dead from the Infinity Circuit, creating armies of Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords that now outnumber living warriors. This demographic catastrophe transformed Aeldari's entire society, the living walking among constructs housing their ancestors while struggling to maintain hope for their Craftworld's future. The psychological impact of this transformation affects every aspect of life aboard the vessel, creating an atmosphere of melancholy that visitors from other Craftworlds find deeply disturbing. Aeldari's experience serves as a warning to all Craftworlds about the existential danger the Tyranids represent, demonstrating that even the most powerful Aeldari vessels can be brought to the brink of destruction by the Great Devourer's endless hunger. The opening of the Great Rift following the fall of Cadia has unleashed chaos forces across the galaxy on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. Demonic incursions that once required specific conditions and careful preparation by cultists now occur spontaneously as the barrier between real space and the warp thins throughout entire sectors. Craftworlds on both sides of the rift face unprecedented threats from chaos forces, their traditional strategies for avoiding or containing demonic manifestations proving insufficient against the scale of corruption now spreading across Imperial space. The webway has suffered extensive damage from the increased warp turbulence, with passages that remained stable for millennia suddenly collapsing or becoming corrupted by chaos influence. Ulthway faces the most direct threat from chaos expansion, its position near the Eye of Terror meaning that the increased warp activity affects it more severely than Craftworlds located in more stable regions. The Black Legion and other traitor forces launch raids against the Craftworld with frequency that would have seemed impossible before the Great Rift's opening, their attacks coordinated with demonic incursions that attempt to breach the Infinity Circuit itself. The Craftworlds forces remain on constant alert, their seers working without rest to predict and counter threats that emerge with minimal warning. The psychological strain of this perpetual warfare affects even Ulthway's disciplined population, as the knowledge that a single successful chaos breach could doom their entire craftworld creates constant background anxiety that no amount of meditation or path discipline can entirely eliminate. The expansion of Necron dynasties represents a threat of different character, but equal severity. The ancient machines have been awakening from their millions of years of slumber in increasing numbers, their tomb worlds activating and beginning campaigns to reclaim territories they controlled before the war in heaven. The Necrons view all younger species as temporary infestations on worlds that rightfully belong to them, and they pursue the extermination or subjugation of these species with the patient inevitability of machines that have already waited 60 million years and can wait 60 million more if necessary. Craftworlds that encounter awakening tomb worlds face enemies whose technology rivals or exceeds their own, whose warriors feel no fear or doubt, and whose strategic patience allows them to pursue objectives across timescales that even long-lived Aeldari struggle to comprehend. Several craftworlds have fought prolonged campaigns against specific Necron dynasties, these conflicts often beginning when Aeldari forces attempt to prevent tomb worlds from fully awakening. The strategy of attacking Necron installations, while they remain dormant or only partially active, offers the best chance of success, as fully awakened tomb complexes can deploy forces that overwhelm even substantial craftworld war hosts. The Necron's ability to repair damage and resurrect destroyed warriors makes them exceptionally difficult opponents, as victories that would cripple other enemies prove temporary setbacks to forces that can rebuild themselves from the molecular level. The Gauss weapons employed by Necron warriors strip matter atom by atom, a death that prevents even spirit stones from protecting Aeldari souls, as the stones themselves are disintegrated along with the bodies they were meant to preserve. Orc-Waz represent threats of a more chaotic nature, their danger coming from unpredictability and overwhelming numbers rather than technological sophistication or strategic planning. The Greenskins breed and multiply wherever they establish themselves, their spores spreading across planets and creating populations that grow exponentially if not contained. A small orc presence can transform into a system threatening Wa within decades if left unchecked, the Greenskins' natural aggression and love of violence driving them to constant expansion and conquest. Craftworlds that discover orc infestations on maiden worlds or near their territories respond with immediate military action, recognizing that allowing the Greenskins time to multiply will create problems that require exponentially greater force to resolve. Biel-Tan has fought more campaigns against orcs than any other major craftworld, their aggressive philosophy and focus on maiden world protection bringing them into frequent conflict with Greenskin empires. The Craftworld's warriors have developed extensive experience in combating orc forces, their tactics emphasizing the elimination of warbosses and other leaders whose deaths can cause Waz to fragment into smaller, more manageable threats. The challenge of fighting orcs lies not in defeating them in individual battles, where Aeldari tactical superiority typically proves decisive, but in achieving permanent victory against an enemy that reproduces through spores and can rebuild their numbers from seemingly complete defeats. Many Craftworld commanders view orc infestations as problems requiring eternal vigilance rather than conflicts that can be definitively won. The Imperium of Man represents perhaps the most complex threat facing the Craftworlds, as humanity possesses both the numbers and industrial capacity to pose genuine dangers while also serving as an unintentional buffer against other enemies. The Moan Keith control vast territories and maintain armies numbering in the billions, their endless waves of Imperial Guard regiments and Space Marine chapters providing resistance against chaos, Tyranids, and other threats that might otherwise threaten Craftworld territories more directly. Yet this same military might make the Imperium dangerous when Imperial and Aeldari interests conflict, particularly regarding maiden worlds that humans have colonized without recognizing or caring about Aeldari claims to these planets. The Imperium's official policy demands the extermination of all Xenos, making peaceful coexistence impossible regardless of how pragmatic individual commanders might be about temporary alliances. The relationship between Craftworlds and the Imperium has deteriorated significantly since the opening of the Great Rift, as both sides face existential threats that make them less willing to compromise or cooperate. Imperial forces struggling to maintain control over their territories view any Xeno's presence as an additional threat they cannot afford to tolerate, while Craftworlds facing unprecedented dangers from chaos and other enemies have less patience for human colonization of worlds they consider rightfully theirs. The conflicts that erupt from these tensions consume resources and lives that both sides can ill afford to spare, yet neither group proves willing to make the concessions necessary for lasting peace. The fracturing of Biel-Tan during the 13th Black Crusade marked a turning point in Craftworld history, demonstrating that even the mightiest vessels remain vulnerable to catastrophic damage. Demonic forces breached the Craftworld's Infinity Circuit during the conflict, their corruption spreading through the Wraithbone Matrix and causing structural failures that split the vessel into multiple fragments. The attack killed billions of Aeldari and destroyed sections of the Infinity Circuit, condemning countless souls to consumption by Slaanesh. The survivors found themselves scattered across several large fragments, each maintaining its own Infinity Circuit and population, but no longer unified into a single structure. The psychological impact of this disaster affected all Craftworlds, as Biel-Tan had been among the largest and most powerful vessels, seemingly invulnerable to the kinds of catastrophic damage that smaller Craftworlds might suffer. The Inari emerged from Biel-Tan's catastrophe, their movement representing a radical departure from traditional Craftworld philosophy. Ivrain claimed that Ennead, the Aeldari god of the dead, had resurrected her and tasked her with gathering followers to complete the god's awakening. The Inari reject the path system entirely, arguing that Ennead offers genuine salvation from Slaanesh rather than the temporary protection provided by spirit stones and infinity circuits. They recruit from all Aeldari factions, bringing together Craftworld warriors, Drukhari, Exodites, and outcasts in service to their shared god. This unprecedented unity across traditional factional boundaries represents either the Aeldari's best hope for survival or a dangerous abandonment of the structures that preserved their civilization since the fall, depending on which Craftworld's perspective one adopts. The quest to gather the Crone Swords and fully awaken Ennead provides the Inari with a concrete objective that goes beyond abstract theological debates. These 5 legendary blades were scattered across the galaxy during the fall, with several falling into Slaanesh's realm within the Eye of Terror. The Inari have successfully recovered several Crone Swords through campaigns that took them into some of the most dangerous locations in the galaxy. Each recovered sword increases Ennead's power, bringing the god closer to full awakening and the ability to challenge Slaanesh directly. The remaining swords present increasingly difficult challenges, with at least one known to rest within Slaanesh's palace in the warp itself, a location that seems impossible to reach and survive. The debate about whether to support the Inari or maintain traditional Craftworld practices divides Aeldari society more deeply than any issue since the fall. Supporters argue that Ennead represents their only realistic chance for genuine freedom from Slaanesh, that the Spirit Stones and Infinity Circuits provide only temporary protection that will eventually fail as Craftworld populations dwindle and their vessels deteriorate. They point to the prophecies of the Rana Dandra, suggesting that Ennead's awakening might be the event that triggers the final battle and determines whether the Aeldari survive or face extinction. Critics counter that abandoning proven methods of protection in favor of faith in an incompletely awakened god represents dangerous wishful thinking, that the costs of pursuing Ennead's awakening have already proven catastrophic as demonstrated by Biel-Tan's fracturing. The practical cooperation between Inari forces and traditional Craftworld armies occurs regularly despite these philosophical disagreements, as both groups recognize that their survival depends on defeating shared enemies. The Inari's military forces include troops from all Aeldari factions, their war hosts combining aspect warriors, incubi, wraith constructs, and other assets that would never cooperate under normal circumstances. This diversity provides tactical flexibility that purely Craftworld forces cannot match, though it also creates coordination challenges as warriors from different traditions learn to fight alongside former enemies. The Inari's willingness to embrace death in service to Ennead makes them valuable shock troops, their fearlessness in combat providing capabilities that more cautious Craftworld forces sometimes lack. The question of whether the Aeldari can escape their doom or are fated to diminish into extinction haunts every Craftworld regardless of their stance on the Inari. The species' population continues declining through attrition from constant warfare, the birth rate insufficient to replace losses even when Craftworlds avoid major catastrophes. The infinity circuits grow fuller with each passing century, the ratio of dead to living shifting inexorably toward the former. Some Farseers have perceived visions, suggesting that the Aeldari will eventually fade entirely, their Craftworlds becoming ghost ships crewed entirely by wraith constructs housing souls that refuse to accept their species' extinction. Other seers glimpse possible futures where Ennead's awakening provides salvation, where the Aeldari reclaim their former glory, or where they find some new path to survival that current generations cannot yet imagine. The unity required for survival remains elusive despite the existential threats facing all Aeldari. The Craftworlds maintain their independence and pursue their own strategies, cooperation occurring only when immediate necessity demands it. The philosophical divisions created by the Inari movement have fractured communities and families, with some Aeldari abandoning their Craftworlds entirely to join Ivrain's followers, while others reject the death cult with vehemence that borders on hatred. The Drukhari continue their raids and depredations, viewing their Craftworld cousins with contempt for clinging to outdated notions of morality and discipline. The Exodites remain isolated on their agrarian worlds, maintaining their simple existence, while the rest of their species struggles with questions of survival and salvation. The Aeldari stand at a crossroads where every choice carries consequences that might determine their species' ultimate fate. The gathering of the Croneswords continues, each recovered blade bringing Ennead closer to full awakening, while requiring sacrifices that cost lives and resources the Aeldari can barely afford. The Craftworlds maintain their vigilance against chaos, Tyranids, Necrons, and other threats, their forces stretched thin across a galaxy that grows more hostile with each passing year. The prophecy of the Rana Dandra looms over all these struggles, a promised final battle that might bring either salvation or extinction. Whether the Aeldari will survive to see that final conflict, and whether they will triumph or fall when it comes, remains unknown even to the most skilled Farseers. The threads of fate remain tangled and unclear, their ultimate pattern yet to be revealed. The slim hope that sustains Craftworld civilization comes not from any guarantee of survival, but from the determination to endure regardless of the odds. The Aeldari have survived 10,000 years since the fall, maintaining their culture and civilization against enemies that should have destroyed them countless times over. They have adapted to circumstances that would have broken lesser species, developing the path system, spirit stones, and infinity circuits to protect themselves from the god their ancestors created. They continue fighting, planning, and hoping because the alternative means accepting extinction and damnation. Whether this determination will prove sufficient to carry them through the challenges ahead, whether Ennead will awaken fully and provide the salvation the Inari promise, or whether the Rana Dandra will mark their final stand before inevitable extinction, only time will reveal. The Aeldari endure, as they have endured since the fall, because they have no other choice.